Jaron Jarvis Channel, Top 20 Scary Stories of the Day from Reddit nosleep. 2018-09-10. Story 1, Let Me Go. I can't sleep, she whispered as she crawled into bed and spooned against my back. Jesus, you're cold, I murmured. She only snuggled closer, throwing her leg over mine. I lay there for a few beats, caught between my alcohol-induced sleep and wakefulness, until I realized whatever this cold thing pressed against my back was. It was not Danae. She'd been in the grave 3 months now. My eyes flew open, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Adrenaline surged through me, but I lay paralyzed except for my eyes and my thundering heart. The icy thing holding me never moved. Instead of it taking on my heat, I took on its chill. I fought against it, and somehow managed to wiggle my toes. Then my whole body spasmed, pitching me out of bed and onto the floor. The crack of my face against the hardwood dazzled me and the coppery taste of blood filled my mouth, but at least I could move. I struggled onto all fours, afraid to lift my head, terrified I'd find some dead, exsanguinated version of Danae peering over the mattress at me. A glance at the clock on my nightstand dispelled some of my night terror. Shit, I should have left 10 minutes ago. I couldn't be late again. Even though I half expected an icy hand to cover mine, I grabbed the mattress and pulled myself to my feet. The empty bed held a tangle of sheets and pillows, but no dead, accusing wife. I didn't dare take time to shower, or even brush my teeth. I threw on my uniform and ran out the door. This job was all I had now, and I sure as hell wasn't in any shape to find a new one. At the hospital, I swung my truck into the emergency parking area, grabbed my cigarettes from the seat and ran inside. I clocked in with 28 seconds to spare. Tony, my night shift partner, frowned when I burst into the security office. "Dude, you look like shit," he said. I glanced down at my half-tucked shirt and my rumpled pants. I hadn't even brushed my hair. "I'm sorry, man. I haven't been able to sleep, and when I finally did, I crashed." "Come on," he said, and motioned me to follow him. Like a chastened toddler, I did. We ended up in the family restroom on the first floor. Tony ducked out while I washed my face with pink liquid soap and dried it with paper towels. He reappeared in a moment with a plastic tub that contained a patient welcome kit, toothbrush, toothpaste, comb and deodorant. "I'm worried about you," he said. Join the club, I thought. My mother, my brothers, and Abby all worried. Looking at my red eyes and drawn face in the mirror, hell, even I worried about me. I can't sleep. And when I do, it's these fucking nightmares. "Do you take anything to help you sleep? Melatonin, Ambien?" he asked. "Does Jack Daniels count?" He didn't smile. Instead, he put his hand on my shoulder. "Jake, we're all real sorry about Danae. We loved her. We love you. But you gotta pull it together, man. You did all you could do." I nodded, and he clapped his hand on my shoulder. Then he left me alone to make myself presentable. When I came out a few minutes later, Tony had already left to make his checks. I grabbed my clipboard to make mine. Hospital security wasn't a bad gig. On the weekend, a lot of the areas like surgery were empty. Of course, tonight's full moon would probably have the psych ward hopping. By the time I'd done my first walk through, I felt better. At least I'd slept some. Before the incident this morning, I wandered down to the emergency waiting. Twice a day, local churches brought in free meals for the families camped out in these waiting areas. I nodded at the volunteers I knew, fixed a styrofoam to-go plate and stepped outside. Mac grinned when he saw me and stubbed out his cigarette. He carefully placed the half-smoked cigarette in a tin, tucked it in his pocket and reached for the plate I offered. "It's the Baptists tonight, ain't it?" he asked. "Those little women are the best cooks." I laughed. "Yeah, you're gonna like it. Fried chicken." "Want me to ask any of those little women if they're single?" "Shoot, no, son," he replied. "Papa is a rolling stone." We shot the breeze for a few minutes, then I told him I needed to head back in. As always, he thanked me, and as always, I told him no need. Technically, we weren't supposed to feed the homeless, but we all loved Mac. I wasn't about to let a decorated war veteran sit out here hungry when a table creaked with food inside. I knew Abby took him breakfast before she left, and I suspected others looked out for him, too. Walking back through emergency, I caught a flash of Abby turning the corner and hurried to catch up. I tugged her blonde ponytail and she turned to smile at me. "Hey, favorite," she said. "What's up?" She'd called me that as long as I could remember. We'd grown up next door to each other. My 3 brothers, at some point or another, had all competed for her attention. I was the favorite, however, or as she liked to tease them, number 1 faults. The others would alternate being number 2 and number 3, except for Joe, who annoyed her so much he was always number 4, or she'd tell him he was her least favorite faults. Even as adults, Abby and I still lived next door to each other. She'd helped me get this job, and also tipped me off to the house I lived in now. Days like this made me thankful I lived only 5 minutes from the hospital. "Not much," I said. "Seems quiet so far." "SHH," she admonished. "They'll hear you." I'd probably opened the gates of hell just by uttering that. To say a night was easy always seemed to curse it. We walked to the elevator and the doors opened before I could even press the button. We looked at each other. "Abracadabra," I said, and motioned her inside. "So, how are you?" she asked. "I'm good." She frowned. "Liar." "Good enough, then," I said. I could tell by her face that she knew that, too, was a lie. "You did all you could do," she said. "I wish people would stop saying that." I snapped, before I could stop myself. She said nothing, just punched the 4th floor button. I sighed. "I'm sorry." I failed her, Abs. "We were fighting and I just drove off." "There's no way you could have known," she insisted. I wiped a hand down my face. I told her I wanted a divorce. Abby's eyes widened. "You never told me that." "How come you never told me that?" The elevator doors dinged open. I followed Abby out and she motioned for me to wait. After a brief, muffled conversation with another nurse, Abby returned and dragged me to the staff break room. She pushed me into a chair and said, "Talk." When I didn't speak, she said, "Halverson?" The whole hospital had buzzed with rumors of an affair. I hadn't told Abby when Danae finally confessed, because that would have destroyed any fragment of friendship they had left. I didn't suppose it mattered now. Halverson was part of it. She admitted it. Abby shook her head, her green eyes narrowed. "Again? She cheated on you again?" "With Halverson?" The again threw me for a moment, and I wondered if there had been others. But no, Abby would have told me. We were too close to shield each other from bitter truths. She meant the time 3 years ago, before Danae and I married. Abby's disgust at Halverson's name stung a little, because she didn't know the worst of it. Not only had Danae slept with the old, gruff doctor, she had done it for a price. She confessed, said it was a mistake and begged me to forgive her. That wasn't even our real issue. She was back on the pills again. Oxys and Somas. Halverson wrote her the script. Abby gasped. "You should turn him in. He knew her history. He should lose his license." "I can't prove he knew. I just look like the bitter, cuckold husband. I never really believed the rumors about them. I even asked her point blank one day. She denied it, and I believed her. I'm so sorry, Jake." Abby didn't get that it wasn't the affair that bothered me most. Danae said that it was just sex, and I believed her. She could shut herself off in ways that I didn't understand. She said it was because of childhood abuse, a coping mechanism. At times, I was closer to her than anyone, but there were places in her heart where even I was a stranger. Abby and Danae had gotten along well enough, I suppose, but I never doubted where Abby's loyalty lay. Danae had always been a little jealous of her, and she absolutely hated that Abby called me favorite, but I'd made it clear when we started dating that my friendship with Abby was non-negotiable. I'd never been unfaithful, never given Danae a reason to doubt me. She couldn't say the same. We fought again that day. I'd already thrown away all the pills I'd found, but I guess she had a stash. She kept falling asleep in her food. I fucking hated that. Still, she denied it. I told her I wouldn't live with someone I couldn't trust. So, I got in my truck and I left. I closed my eyes, remembering that awful day. Danae had chased me into the yard, crying and begging me to stay, but I jumped in my truck and roared off. She tried to call me a dozen times, but I kept hitting ignore on my phone. Then I got that text. By the time I made it back home, it was almost too late. Hell, I guess it had been too late, because even though she'd lived for 3 days, she'd never regained consciousness. I got lost in that memory, of busting down the bathroom door. Of her pale face sinking in that swirling red water. Abby squeezed my hand. "Stop," she said. "It wasn't your fault." Danae had a history of depression. She tried to kill herself the first time long before she started working here. Long before she ever met you. That's why I should have been more careful. I saw one attempt, remember? I knew how fragile she was. You were not responsible for her happiness. You didn't know she'd do that. You are not God. My pager buzzed and for once, I was grateful. I looked down at the screen and said, "I gotta go. I have a transport." "Okay," she said. "But swing back around later." When we stood, she hugged me. "I love you, favorite. We're gonna get you through this." "Love you, too, Abs." The worst part of my job was definitely the transports. Carla, the nursing supervisor, waited for me in the ER. "Hey, good looking," she said. "Ready to take a ride?" "Anytime." I liked Carla. She was good at her job and strong as an ox. If I had to do a transport with anyone, I'd just as soon it be her. But I grimaced when she led me to exam room number 3, the same room they'd wheeled Danae to when we first arrived. Thankfully, a sheet already covered the body on the bed. "Is it a child?" I asked. "No, she's in her 20s, but she's a little thing. You could probably just throw her over your shoulder." She didn't mean any disrespect. That's the way things were in hospitals. Gallows humor to deal with all the horror. We transferred the body from the bed to the gurney, then took the staff elevators to the basement. Carla and I made small talk, then she asked how I was holding up. Sometimes it was nice to work with people who knew what I was going through, and who treated me and supported me like family, but sometimes I wished I was just another guy in another place, where no one knew anything about me. Carla left, her job completed. I pulled up the computer screen, opened the morgue book, and moved the sheet to look at the dead girl's toe tag. The tattoo on her foot stopped me cold. A daisy. Danae had one in the same spot. She'd gotten it on our first date. I'd taken her to a little hole-in-the-wall bar in Nashville to see one of my favorite bands, Goodbye June. She'd fallen in love with their song Daisy and I'd fallen in love with her. She'd gotten the tattoo that night, on 10th Avenue. I'd taken to singing You Drive Me Crazy, Daisy, to her, and it evolved into my pet name for her. Though I knew the girl on the slab wasn't her, that the tattoo wasn't even the same, it spooked me. Tendrils of this afternoon's nightmare brushed me, threatened to wrap around me again. I could almost hear her say, "I can't sleep." I forced it from my mind and hurried to get the girl's information down so I could get out of there. I completed the computer work, then looked back at the tag to double-check the spelling of her last name. Her cell phone blared to life with Evanescence's Bring Me to Life, and I jumped backwards, banging my head on a shelf. It would have been gruesomely funny if Carla had still been in here with me, but in my current state, it scared the shit out of me. The song blasted on and on as I scribbled my entry in the morgue notebook. I didn't know how her phone even had a signal down here. I had to carry a pager. With the thick concrete walls of this place, I was lucky to get a signal even outside the basement. Only when the morgue door closed behind me did I feel like I could breathe again. But my relief was short-lived. When I approached the elevators, the doors opened without me getting anywhere near the button. I knew it was nothing to freak out about, probably some kid messing with buttons, but I was extra jumpy today. I almost didn't have the nerve to get in it. Things had been happening around me for a while now. Creepy things. Objects moved around the house, phone calls with no caller information, her songs on the radio, even the old, obscure ones. I didn't know whether to attribute it to too much alcohol, too little sleep or losing my damn mind. But any of those things were better than the alternative that maybe Danae was haunting me. Thankfully, the next few hours passed uneventfully. I went to find Abby again around midnight for lunch. She looked up when the elevator doors opened. I waved and headed down the hall toward her. As I walked past one of the rooms, a sound from inside distracted me. Beep, beep, beep in a frantic rhythm, like someone's heart thumping about 170 beats per minute. It sounded so odd that I stopped to listen. It slowed until it was more like beep, beep, beep. Then it stopped altogether. "Hey!" I yelled. "Someone's coding." Abby gave me a confused look, but didn't move. "Hurry!" I shouted, and threw open the door. An old man sitting up in his hospital bed glowered at me, then turned his attention back to The Price is Right. The noise, the beeps, someone had just spun the fucking wheel. Abby appeared at my shoulder. She snickered in my ear, then she burst out laughing. She laughed until her eyes shone bright with tears. Feeling really stupid and trying not to smile, I shut the door and muttered, "Asshole." Abby laughed even harder, until she was hugging herself and leaning against the wall. Tasha, another nurse, came out of one of the rooms and said, "What's so funny?" "Code Bob." Abby squeaked, and I couldn't help it. I laughed too. "It's Code Drew now," I said. "Come on, jerk, and I'll buy you lunch. Give me like 2 minutes." She swiped at her eyes. God, I needed that. It took her more like 5, but then she grabbed her purse and we headed to the cafeteria. I remembered what she'd said about needing the laugh and asked, "Rough night?" "No," she said. "Not bad. You?" I told her about the girl in the morgue, thinking I'd get another laugh, but she squeezed my forearm and said, "I'm sorry." I didn't want to talk about bad things with her. She had heard enough, been there for me enough. She'd been working emergency the night I'd carried Danae's dripping, almost lifeless body through the double doors, screaming for someone to help me. I'd driven Danae to the hospital myself. After trying to tourniquet the mangled wrist she'd slashed so deep and vertically, I'd panicked and thrown her in my truck. We lived so close to the hospital I thought it would be faster than waiting for an ambulance. Abby told me that had been the right reaction, although it hadn't made much difference. The cafeteria, as usual, didn't have much selection. I grabbed a pre-wrapped cheeseburger and Abby got a plastic-wrapped salad. When she reached for it, her sleeve pulled up and I noticed the ugly purple bruises on her wrist. "Hey," I said. "What the hell?" I grabbed her arm before she could stop me, and turned her wrist to inspect it. Those were definitely fingerprints. "Did Connor?" "What?" "No." She looked around. "No," she said again. "It was a patient. One of the psych admits." She answered quickly enough, and her answer made sense, but something flashed in her eyes before she pulled away to grab a juice from the cooler. I waited until I'd paid for our stuff and sat to say, "Look, if Connor hurt you." SHH, no. I told you what happened, so drop it. Please. No chance of that. Abby meant way too much to me. The thought of someone hurting her made my gut clench. And it felt good, to feel something besides pain and grief. I wasn't going to drop it, but next time I mentioned it, I'd be taking it up with him. I'd despised Connor since the day I met him. The arrogant, overbearing doctor was totally wrong for her. She told me the same about Danae, the totally wrong for me part, but maybe she should have warned Danae instead. "Hey," Abby said. Beep beep. "I'm never going to live that down, am I?" "Oh, God, no," she said, and I flipped my Coke lid at her. She grinned at me, then said, "So, your mom called me today. She wanted to know what I thought about having a surprise birthday party for you next week." "What? Please tell me you shut that down." She rolled her eyes. "Of course I did. I got your back, loser." I thanked her and toyed with the salt shaker. "My mom calls you more than she calls me. I don't think she's ever given up on the idea of us together." Abby made a face. Excuse me. You should be so lucky." "There's a problem with my eyes," I said. "I can't get them off you." She grinned, then made a no sound. "I'm having a problem with mine, too, because I can't see you getting anywhere with me." We laughed at our inside joke. I'd had the distinct pleasure of sitting beside her at a bar one night when some guy tried that on her, and been shot down in flames. It felt good to laugh again, and to hang out with Abby. But it also made me feel guilty. How could I laugh about anything, when my wife was dead? After lunch, I did my next round of walkthroughs, then went back to the security office to watch the waiting room monitors for the homeless who sometimes slipped in, or for gang activity. Everything seemed calm. I scanned all 10 waiting areas. Most everyone seemed to have bedded down for the night, though a few cell phones glowed in the dim light. The TV still played on the 3rd floor, but the people inside didn't seem to mind. 3 of them slept while a 4th scrolled on his phone. As I watched, he laid his cell down and pulled the blanket over his head. I don't know why it caught my eye. I almost missed it. Opposite the recliners, in one of the chairs, something white and smoky rose. For a moment, I panicked, thinking fire. But it didn't look like a fire. It looked like someone standing. I gaped at the screen, and the thing seemed to take on a shape. It almost had a face, which it turned toward the guy with the cell. The TV winked off, pitching the room in darkness. The televisions here were old. No remotes, no timers. To shut it off, a person had to physically touch it. The guy's cell phone lit up. He held it over his head like a flashlight and scanned the room. Then he lay back down. At that moment, Tony walked in, giving me my next jump of the night. "Dude, you have to see this," I said. "Tell me what this is." I replayed the video for him. He frowned, then watched it again. "That's just some distortion in the tape." "And the TV?" He shrugged. "Maybe the power blinked." Tony was one of the most practical people I'd ever known. If a leprechaun came through the door riding a unicorn, I'm sure he'd logic the hell out of it until he had a reasonable explanation. But he wasn't the one I really wanted to show this to. I wanted to show Abby. "I'm going to walk around," I said. When I stood, he grabbed my arm. "Hey, I have something for you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small square of wrapped-up paper towel. "Ambien. It helps me sleep. I thought you might want to try a couple of mine, and if you like it, get someone to write you a script." Thanks," I said, and took it from him. I'd actually been thinking about it. Anything to chase away the nightmares. I got in the elevator, and after some hesitation, I hit the button to the 3rd floor. I had to check that waiting room. The people inside slept, all 4 of them, and the TV remained off. I moved over to the chair, expecting something white and spectral rise from it at any moment, but nothing did. No ghosty. But the chair was not empty. A single daisy lay on the seat. Unnerved, I stalked back to the elevator and went to Abby's floor. On my way to the nurse's desk, someone called to me from one of the rooms. I peeked inside and the elderly woman on the bed motioned me closer. "Mom? Can I help you with something? I'm cold," she said. "Can you get me an extra blanket?" I got her one out of the closet and covered her. "Thank you, dear. But what about her?" "Who?" I asked, looking at the unoccupied bed on the other side. She pointed behind me, at an empty corner. "The girl in the pink gown says she's cold, too." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Turning on my heel, I ran from the room. I forgot about Abby, forgot everything except what it felt like to drag a beautiful, pale girl from a tub filled with hot water and blood, and how it had stained her white gown pink. Somehow, I made it through the rest of the shift. I didn't care about the ghost in the waiting room, or the ghost in the old woman's room. I only worried about the ghost waiting for me at home. That's one reason I stopped by the gas station near home and picked up a 6-pack of Bud Light. My house didn't feel like a ghost lived here. It didn't feel like anyone did, myself included. I still didn't have a door on the bathroom, though I'd thrown the splintered one in back of my truck and hauled it to the dump. I took the Ambien, drained 3 of the beers and climbed in the shower. I ran the water hot as Danae had in this same tub. I closed my eyes under the spray, but I had to open them again because all I saw was her face. The pink, steaming water. Her gored wrist, and the one that wasn't, because she'd done such a great job on the first one she hadn't been able to finish the other. Shit, I did not need to be thinking of this before I tried to sleep. I considered trying to stay up, but there had been too much of that lately. I desperately craved sleep. Yawning, I cut off the shower and grabbed a towel. After drying my face, I glanced at the mirror. The words "Let me go" stood out on the mirror, scrawled on steamed glass. It hit me like a punch. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know how long it had been there, or if it was even real. I wandered to the kitchen in my boxers and peered out the window at Abby's house. Connor's Mustang sat in her drive. Glancing at my bedroom door, I couldn't go in there. Instead, I sat on the couch, finished the six-pack and passed out. I woke in my own bed after more dreams of my dead wife snuggling next to me, trying to escape the chill of her grave. Thankfully, the bedroom light was on. The clock on the nightstand read 9:43. Panic froze me before I realized this was Monday, my day off. I took a deep breath and rolled onto my back. The space beside me was empty. When I threw back the blanket, my heart stalled. Mud stained the bottom of my white sheets, and my feet. Grimy footprints covered my bedroom floor. My heart thumped painfully when I realized there were two sets. Mine leading into the room, and a smaller set going in both directions. I used to dream sometimes of chasing a poisonous snake through my house. I was scared to go after it, but even more terrified to let it get away, because then I wouldn't know where it was. That was how I felt looking at those footprints. I didn't want to follow them because of what they might lead to, but I couldn't stand not knowing either. I tracked them through the living room into the kitchen. Food wrappers littered the counter, like a starving person had raided the cabinets. A half-empty peach nehi sat on the marbled surface. Danae's favorite drink. I hated those things. After she died, I hadn't been able to throw them out. The footsteps led out the door. I hesitated, my hand on the knob, childishly afraid to step outside into the darkness. I glanced out the window at Abby's house. Connor's Mustang still sat in the drive, parked next to her Camaro. But as I turned away, something caught my eye. A cigarette glowing in the darkness. A flash of blonde hair in the driver's seat of her car. I watched for a moment, but she simply sat there. I'd never known Abby to smoke. My curiosity and need to talk to her superseded my fear of the dark. I walked outside in my bare feet. I rapped on the window and she jumped. Then she looked back at the house and rolled the window down. She'd been crying, though she ducked her head and tried to hide her swollen eyes from me. All the crazy thoughts in my head dissipated like the smoke from her cigarette, replaced by concern for her. "Abby, what's wrong?" She opened her mouth, then she began to cry again. I jerked open the door and took her in my arms. She clung to me for a moment, then we heard Connor yell from inside. "Go," she said. "Go, please. I'll be over in a little bit. I've got to end this my own way. If you're here, it'll be worse." "What? You're breaking up with him?" "Abigail." Connor yelled. I hated how he called her that, Abigail, like Abby wasn't good enough for him. Abby was too good for all of us. She shut the car door, dropped her cigarette in the drive and ground it with her heel. Then she did something that stunned me. She grabbed me and kissed me. When she broke away, I stood there, paralyzed. She started walking toward her house. Then, over her shoulder, she shot me a tremulous smile and said, "I have wanted to do that my entire life. I'll talk to you later, favorite." I didn't know what to do. I listened for a moment, but didn't hear yelling, so I walked back to my house to wait. I stopped in the middle of my yard, staring at Danae's flower bed. All of the daisies had been dug up. Daisies and clumps of mud covered my lawn. Had I done that? Periodically, I stole glances at Abby's house through the kitchen window as I cleaned up the mess, then showered. I didn't know what to think. Abby and I had never been like that, though. Not that I hadn't thought about it over the years. I mean, who wouldn't? Even though it felt like a betrayal, that kiss had felt right. "Let me go." Danae's voice startled me, clear as a bell in that empty living room. I jumped, then turned around, half expecting to see her behind me. Nothing. I grabbed an 8x10 wedding photo off the wall and slammed it on the floor. Glass flew everywhere. "You let me go!" I shouted. "You left me! You left me, Danae!" My cell rang. I grabbed it up, expecting Abby, but it was the hospital. Lanny, one of the night shift nurses, said, "Man, I hate to bother you on your night off, but it's Mac. I think it's a stroke. He's pretty bad. And he's asking for you." I didn't know what to do about Abby, so I sent her a text that read, "Mac's in intensive care. I'm headed to hospital." I guess I was a mile down the road when I realized my CD was playing the same song, over and over. "Let Me Go," by Three Doors Down. At the hospital, Lanny met me at the desk. "Glad you made it. I don't think he has long." "He keeps saying your name," I thought. "Thank you," I interrupted. "Where is he?" "Of course. Exam room number 3. Mac's eyes were closed when I stepped around the curtain and I thought he was already gone, but then he opened them and beckoned me. I think I read his lips more than anything, but he said, "Danae." "Danae?" He said something else, but I couldn't hear, so I leaned down. He said, "Contract." Then he died. The word mystified me. "What contract?" "Goodbye, Mac," I said, and walked outside. Numb. I felt so numb, and I couldn't understand what was happening. I didn't know what Danae wanted from me, and I sure as hell didn't know about any contract. If only I could talk to her, then I realized maybe I could. I caught the elevator to the 4th floor and found myself standing outside the old lady's door, the one who'd mentioned the girl in the pink gown. If she'd talked to Danae once, maybe she could talk to her again. I knocked. "Come in," she called. Thankfully, she still didn't have a roommate. "Mom, I don't know if you remember me. You brought me a blanket," she said. "I'm not senile yet." I gave her a polite laugh, but my smile faded when she added, "The girl in the pink gown talks about you. She says your name is Jake." "Yes," I said. "My name is Jake." "Did she say anything else?" The old woman reached for my hand, and I gave it to her. She squeezed it with her frail fingers. "She said you have to let her go. She can't move on until you let her go." "What does that mean?" "She says there's a contract she can't break." I shook my head. "I don't know anything about a contract. I don't know what she means." "I'm sorry. I don't know." I thanked her and left. Halfway to the parking lot, my cell phone rang. I fished it out of my pocket and froze when I saw the incoming caller ID. Danae calling. Her cell phone lay in a kitchen drawer, disconnected and dead for weeks now. I hit the accept button and said, "Hello?" The crackle of static filled my ear, but the pounding of my pulse nearly drowned it out. I tried to say hello again, but my mouth went dry. A voice broke through, gritty and shrieking, but undeniably Danae. "Hurry!" she screamed. "Hurry!" Then she shouted something that knocked the breath from me. "Abby!" I jumped in my truck and tore out of the parking lot. Connor's car still sat in her driveway, but I didn't care. I took her front steps 2 at a time, then banged on her door. Something crashed. Fueled by adrenaline, I jerked the knob and barreled my way inside. Connor straddled her on the living room floor, choking her. Abby's small hands beat ineffectively at him, her face an ugly mottled red. I grabbed him in a headlock and yanked him backwards. He let her go to defend himself, and Abby scuttled backwards like a crab, gasping for air. We tumbled around her living room, trading blows and knocking over furniture. I finally found my feet and hauled him to his, jerking him out the front door. I tried to push him down the front steps, but he grabbed a fistful of my shirt and we both went. Sirens screamed in the distance and soon strobing blue lights lit Abby's yard. Rough hands jerked us apart and they hauled both of us to the station. Nearly 3 hours later, I sat with Abby on her front steps, holding an ice bag to my eye and drinking a Jack and Coke. "What happened?" I asked her. She didn't speak, and it took some prodding to get it out of her. "They'd been fighting about me." Abby had come home from the grocery store and found me passed out in Danae's flower bed. She'd helped me inside, inciting Connor's jealousy and rage. The second set of muddy footprints had belonged to her. "I meant to come back over and help clean up," she said. "But things got a little crazy." I didn't know what to say, so I simply squeezed her hand. I've known he was wrong for me for a long time, but I didn't want to admit it. I thought I could change him, but all I did was harm myself. Suddenly, I realized what contract Danae meant. I jumped up and said, "Abby, I'll explain everything in a little while, but I need to go find something." "Can I help?" she asked, as I started across the lawn to my place. "I think I have to do this alone. Can I come over to talk later?" "You better," she said. It took me nearly an hour, but I finally found it, tucked in a drawer of Danae's jewelry box. I lay across our bed to read it. Danae's first suicide attempt had been in her teens, but her second had been about a year after we'd started dating. She'd told me about her battle with depression, but I'd never seen it coming, never had a clue how bad it was until I'd walked into that apartment that day and found her sprawled on the floor, empty prescription bottle in her hand. It had been a close call that day, too. A few days later, we'd been lying in her hospital bed together and I'd begged her to never do that again. She'd promised, then made a joke about shaking on it, or drawing up a contract. "I like that," I'd said, and she'd taken it more seriously than I'd thought. The next day, she'd presented me with this. "I, Danae Roberts, make a commitment to living. I will not harm myself or anyone else in any way. I will not attempt suicide, or any other self-injury. If I begin to have thoughts of harming myself, 1. I will try to identify specifically what is upsetting me. 2. I will review alternatives to self-harm, such as thinking about my friends, family and my hot, supportive boyfriend, Jake. 3. I will seek out a responsible, caring and supportive person if thoughts of self-harm continue. 4. If at this time I do not feel I can control my behavior, I will contact 911 or the nearest emergency room." She'd signed it with a flourish, then made me witness and date it. "I'm sorry you couldn't keep this promise," I said. "But you are no longer bound by it. I hope you find peace, Daisy." I burned the contract over the bathroom sink and washed the ashes down the drain. Story 2, To Desires of 2, Stork Gives to You. From Wishes of 3, Raven Takes from Thee. When I was 8 years old, my parents had what I now suspect to be an accident in their family planning. My mom became pregnant and out came a boy named Tim, but they nearly always called him Timmy. I never appreciated just how much love and attention I received as an only child. When I came home from school, I'd have my mom all to myself to talk about my day. When my father came home he'd always, after kissing my mom hello, sit down next to me on the couch and ask me about my homework or the latest sketches I drew in my notebook. But when Timmy was born that all changed. My mom and dad were both tired a lot during those tough infant months. He regularly disrupted the household with this crying fits and somehow it seemed even worse in the middle of the night. My mom constantly needed to breastfeed, bottle feed, dangle keys, sing songs, all in an attempt to soothe him. Now when I came home from school, I'd go to my mom and she would look at me with droopy eyes and put her finger to her lips, implying that Timmy was sleeping and please for the love of God don't say or do anything to change that. I too was tired of hearing him cry and had no problem staying in my room to work on my homework, quietly. My dad would soon come home and one of two things would happen: he would either go to bed and lay down for a nap if Timmy was sleeping, the late night outbursts were cutting deeply into his sleep hours, or he would be greeted with a bellow of crying on behalf of little Timmy, causing my dad to lock himself in the bathroom with the overhead fan turned on. I could hardly blame him, as when that baby cried it cut through all the walls and made your blood pressure soar. During this time, my imagination began to weave ways in which Timmy might be taken away. This daydreaming led me to ponder more deeply that well-known rhyme that is sometimes printed on baby products. To Desires of 2. Stork gives to you. From Wishes of 3. Raven takes from thee. To my young, desperate mind, I took this rather literally. Well, sort of. I knew storks didn't literally give babies. I had seen my mom pregnant and knew Timmy came out of her. But the raven part tantalized me, and the thought that something had the power to take a baby away gave me hope. My child mind would regularly conceive of a few ways this might work. Perhaps, if you left your baby out in the park, a flock of ravens might come and fly off with him. I even thought it might have been a euphemism for death. Maybe instead of flying off with the baby, the raven would simply peck the crying child's eyes out, and peck until there was no baby left at all. I squirmed thinking about it, as it seemed like a terrible way to go. I took my fingernail and jammed it into my arm to simulate a peck, and then in my mind multiplied that by 1,000 and imagined dying that way. Regardless of the method, I was intrigued with the idea of a flock of birds coming to solve my household's baby problem. I sat in my room looking through a dictionary and looked up the definition for raven. It sounded wonderfully powerful. The black and white drawing that accompanied the definition showed a black and sleek bird a bit larger than a crow. I bet it could take out any baby. At school during library hour, I would do more reading on ravens. I learned a group of ravens is called a conspiracy and that they are a carrion bird. This meant they ate decaying animals. The animal a certain darker, and the more I learned, the more hope I had in the poem. I would read anything on them, including myths and legends. Depending on which culture or religion, they could represent anything from death to tortured souls. Did you know that when Cain murdered Abel, it was a raven that suggested burying the body to hide it? At least it says that in the Quran. Once again, I saw this creature as being incredibly well suited for the task. I couldn't help but think these legends added credence to the rhyme. As fun as all this was to imagine, eventually the idea of a raven taking my little brother seemed silly. I couldn't find a way to make it actually happen. If you gave my young self a ritual to enact and said it would enable a conspiracy of ravens to take Timmy away, I would have done it. He continued to be in a constant of crying, and I wanted my mom and dad back more than anything. Besides, my senses told me they hated having this baby in the house as much as me. My dad started staying later at work and coming back home mostly just to crawl into bed. My mom looked frazzled and weary, and her brisk step with the glimmer in her eye were all but gone. She walked around in sweats all day and looked like she hadn't slept since the day Timmy was born. Even I started to go to school with bags under my eyes. My teacher eventually pulled me aside and asked how things were going at home. When I explained the infant, she nodded her head and appeared to understand. The nights blended into each other. On one of those nights, my dad came home from work especially late. I heard a door slam and my mom yelling louder than I've ever heard before. I eyeballed my Batman clock, 1 a.m. I laid there under the covers listening to what they were saying, but it was hard to hear because once again, Timmy started up a raucous fit of crying. I heard phrases like, "Where were you? He doesn't need anything. I can't do this by myself anymore. I hate this." I had never heard my parents fight this way before, but I shared the sentiments expressed. I took my hands and jammed them against my ears and started humming to myself. After some time, it settled down, though Timmy was still crying. I heard my mom sigh, shut the master bedroom door, and make her way to the living room. The arguing completely stopped, and the only sound left was Timmy crying his lungs out. I tried to sleep, but of course it was impossible. That is, until the crying abruptly stopped. For a brief few seconds I didn't hear anything. Then I heard some muffled banging in the master bedroom. Though it was hard to make out exactly what those noises were, I knew it could not be one of my parents since I never heard them move from the living room. After that brief respite of silence, Timmy broke out in a cry more ferocious than last, which cut through the deepest part of my chest. I heard no movement from my parents and felt it was up to me to check on him. As I slowly made my way to the master bedroom, I took a peek at the living room couch and saw them slumped onto one another, fast asleep. Those muffled movements continued, and I slowly made my way to their room, opened the door, and looked inside. At first my mind couldn't wrap itself around what I was looking at. I saw the window open and what I thought was a man in a trench coat standing by the crib. As he moved one massive wing underneath my brother, my eyes adjusted and I saw that it was not a man at all, but a human-sized raven. He scooped up Timmy and stood up straight while holding him as though his wing were a cradle. The massive bird saw me and cocked his head in mild curiosity. He turned his head to one side, as birds do, to get a better look at me with one eye. I stared back at him in awe. His black eye blinked rapidly as he continued to twitch his head slightly. His beak was a foot long. He took his other wing and slowly placed it on top of Timmy, who was still crying like mad. As he smashed the wing onto my brother's face, the cries became muffled. I could hardly hear him anymore. A sudden feeling of horror came over me. It's one thing to wish your little brother to get pecked to death by a flock of ravens, it's quite another to witness a giant raven possibly smother your baby brother to death right before your eyes. He then turned around and with a heavy hop landed onto the windowsill in a crouching position. In another hop, he jumped outside. He left with my brother in between his wings. I stood there for a moment before I jerked into action. I rushed to the window and despite the dark night sky, I spotted the giant raven soaring upwards. I imagined him holding my brother in his beak. I ran to the living room and shouted at my parents to wake up. All I could get across was that Timmy was taken and they had to go to their room immediately. They woke up, shocked and puffy-eyed, and made their way to the master bedroom. A little part of me hoped it was all a nightmare. Upon seeing the opened window and the empty crib, my mom immediately called the cops while my dad frantically jumped out the window to try and find the kidnapper. Of course, he had no such luck. My parents and the police all asked me what I saw and I told them the whole truth, but they interpreted it as something different. They figured the kidnapper must have been wearing some type of bird costume, or maybe he had a feathery coat on and my imagination filled in the rest. It hardly seemed to matter as they never had any leads. To this day, I wonder where little Timmy was taken. Now that I'm older, I feel like being a big brother could be nice. I can only hope he's still alive and maybe one day he'll be given back to us. Though I often contemplate those first two lines in that rhyme. To desires of two. Stork gives to you. I understand that desires of two could be a euphemism for sex, but it's hard not to think it's as simple as the wishes that led to the raven. If two people simply desire strongly enough, perhaps it could bring about a baby. Maybe it could even bring back a baby. I truly do desire for Timmy to be back with us. Although, I can't help but speculate that Timmy is being held somewhere while a raven and a stork wait for one of my parents to also desire him back. If one of them did, that would make two of us. But something tells me neither one does. Story 3, My neighbor died recently. My neighbor died recently, and I need to talk about it to someone other than the police or I swear I'll lose my mind. For starters, I live in a small, otherwise boring neighborhood. Now, this neighborhood isn't in the safest part of town, but I never expected something as awful as this to happen so close to home. Nevertheless, it did, and that's why I wrote this. Anyway, I used to have a neighbor named Mr. Garrison. Mr. Garrison was a kind elderly man who'd offer help to anyone who needed it. He didn't really go anywhere beyond our neighborhood unless it was absolutely necessary. However, he did go out to his front yard almost every day to tend to his garden. He put his heart and soul into that garden and it showed. During the summer, he'd always have a little plot of dirt in front of his house surrounded by bricks that was home to various colorful flowers. The splash of color was a nice change from the otherwise dreary tone of this place. I'd usually see him tending to his garden almost every morning as I left for work. One day I decided to pay him a visit to thank him for recently taking care of my cat for me while I was visiting family, and even though he said he didn't need anything in return, I thought I'd give him some money for it anyway while I was there. I knocked on his front door and waited only a few seconds before I heard loud footsteps come to the door and stop just on the other side of it. I waited a few seconds and when he still hadn't opened the door I said, "Mr. Garrison? I'm sorry to bother you, I'd just like to give you some cash for taking care of Mittens last week." There was no response, but I was sure I had clearly heard someone come to the door. After waiting for what seemed like forever with no response, I awkwardly kneeled down and slid a $20 bill halfway under his door. As I stood back up, the money was pulled the rest of the way under the door by who I assumed was Mr. Garrison. After that I went home and tried to go about my day normally, but I just couldn't shake off a nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong. A few days passed and I still hadn't seen Mr. Garrison go outside at all, so I tried knocking on his front door again. He hadn't even been tending to his garden and his flowers were beginning to wilt. This time there was no response at all, footsteps or otherwise. Given Mr. Garrison's old age, I feared the worst and called the police to check on him and make sure he was all right. I remember standing in my kitchen and looking out the window to see a police cruiser park outside of Mr. Garrison's house in response to my call. 2 officers got out and went inside to look for him. They came out 5 minutes later with horrified expressions. One officer vomited into the grass while the other held up a walkie-talkie and started saying something that I couldn't hear from inside of my house. I would later learn that they were calling for the backup. They found him, but they didn't find him alive. They found Mr. Garrison's body under the stairs in his basement. He had been brutally stabbed over a dozen times with his own kitchen knife. His house had been ransacked and all of his cash as well as anything of value that was small enough to carry had been taken. There was an investigation and I was even a suspect until I was cleared because I was confirmed to be elsewhere when they determined the murder took place. You'd think my next-door neighbor being murdered would be disturbing enough, but you know what really gets to me? According to what the police told me, Mr. Garrison had died at least a day before I visited to give him the $20. I don't think I imagined the footsteps coming to the door, and I know I didn't imagine someone pulling the money the rest of the way under the door. Whoever that was, it wasn't Mr. Garrison. The police think that someone had wanted to rob Mr. Garrison. Mr. Garrison probably woke up and saw them, which led to him being murdered and shoved under the stairs of his unfinished basement. They then proceeded to live in his house for a day or two and might have stayed even longer had I not shown up at the front door, and the rest is history. So far, they haven't caught anyone, but I really hope they get whoever did this. My neighbor died recently, and I stood less than 3 feet away from his killer without even knowing it. Story 4, Debriefing Transcript, Case Number 8820004519, Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office. Transcript of Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office debriefing, tape recorded Friday, September 7, 2018, 9:30, Case Number 8820004519. Begin tape. Kroger. Okay, I'm beginning the recording. Stating for the record, this is Chief Deputy Alan Kroger of the Division of Internal Affairs. With me are Detectives Sean Reynolds and David Jefferson of NOPD Homicide. We are interviewing 2 sheriff's deputies regarding the events of Monday, September 3, 2018. Deputies, will you please state your names and badge numbers? Cough. LeBeau. This is Deputy Roy LeBeau, badge 8771. Silence of 019. Kroger. Deputy. Snowden. James Snowden. Badge 1126. Kroger. Thank you, deputies. We have your case file report on this incident. We'd just like to get a bit more detail, see if you can remember any more of what went on. If you'll just start at the beginning and take us through the entire experience. LeBeau. Of course. Deputy Snowden and I were on patrol in the lower 9th Ward, when we got the call, 103D at the Chalmette Home Depot. Reynolds. 103D. LeBeau. Disturbance. Dispatcher said a homeless man was making a scene, threatening people. We rolled up in the Prowler approximately 5 to 6 minutes after taking the call. Kroger. What time would this be? LeBeau. It was, what was it, Jim? 10 p.m.? 10:15. Silence of 018. LeBeau. Jim? Well, if you have a copy of the report. Kroger. We can check. Go on. LeBeau. We were met at the door by the store manager. People were streaming out of the store. I wouldn't call it a panic, but nobody wanted to hang around. The manager told us this homeless guy had started shouting at people, knocking over displays, that kind of thing. Upon entry to the store, we could hear this individual shouting, along with crashing noises. Kroger. What kind of shouting? Words? LeBeau. Words, but also noises. A kind of howling, almost animal sounds. Chilling, if I'm being honest. Kroger. What words? Lobo. A lot about his thoughts, how his thoughts were deadly, going to kill us all. How they were attacking him, something about how his thoughts were going to eat him. Snowden. Devour his soul. Silence of 011. Snowden. He said they were going to devour his soul and all of ours. Lobo. Yeah. He was talking about his thoughts like they were some kind of external thing, a being. He started repeating, they're coming, they're coming. Louder each time, till he was just wailing. Kroger. Could you see him? Lobo. Not at first. He was behind a big display case he'd knocked over, by the power tools. We unholstered and advanced. Deputy Snowden flanked him to the right, so I got a look at him first. Kroger. Can you describe him? Lobo. Tall, either white or Hispanic, hard to tell. His face and clothes were extremely dirty, stiff like you see on people who've been on the street a long time. Lean face, beard. His eyes, they seemed almost too wide, wider than should be possible. And they gleamed but not like you've ever seen. They looked, worse than anguished. Haunted. Sound of paper rustling. Kroger. Is this photo the person you saw in the store? Lobo. It could be. He's all cleaned up in this photo. Kroger. His name is Henry Dameron. He was recently serving 13 months for malicious mayhem. Lobo. Mayhem? What did he do? Reynolds. Desecrated a church. Lit a fire on the altar, burned up what was either a large possum or perhaps a small dog. Kroger. He was violent on arrest, but served his time without incident. He was just released a week ago. Lobo. A week? That can't be. This guy was filthy, long hair, beard. Black cracked fingernails. You could smell him 15 feet away. He had to have been on the streets a year. Silence of 022. Kroger. Please go on. Lobo. He was brandishing a cordless drill, one of the big 20 volts ones, at a Walt, I think. Waving it around. Sounds. Case being opened. Kroger. Was it this one here? Lobo. Yes, that's it. Reynolds. How can you be sure this is the one? Lobo. Because of the blood. Silence of 008. Lobo. I ordered him to drop it and get his hands up, but he ignored me. Deputy Snowden repeated the order. He was screaming, just one long, throat-tearing scream. I used my free hand to get out my taser, all the while providing verbal warnings. But I think he just couldn't hear me over his screams. I pointed the taser at him and told Snowden to step back. That was when. Lobo gulps, sighs. Kroger. Do you need some water? Lobo. No. Silence of 003. Lobo. That was when he turned the drill on his forehead and pulled the trigger. It must have been a demo model because it was fully charged and the drill bit went into his skull like a hot spoon through soft serve and I didn't know what to do and then he yanked the drill out and there was this great big fountain of blood like it was under pressure and then he went down. Silence of 033. Lobo. I radioed for a medic and Jim went to the guy and tried to stop the bleeding but it was just pouring out. Kroger. He was still alive? Lobo. For a while. He was staring into space with this smile on his face, and just repeating they're not coming anymore. They're not coming anymore. We tried CPR, but it was no use. EMTs pronounced him dead on the scene. Silence of 015. Throat clearing. Kroger. Thank you, Deputy Lobo. Deputy Snowden, do you have anything you want to add? Silence of 010. Kroger. Deputy Snowden? Snowden. Inaudible. Kroger. I'm sorry, Deputy, what was that? Snowden. I said he was right. Kroger. Right? Snowden. They are coming. Kroger. What? Snowden. They are coming. They are coming. They are, inaudible shouting. Sound of scuffle, conflict. Shouts. Sound of electric drill. Screaming. Sound of conflict. Scream, ends abruptly. Inaudible shouting of 110. End tape. Story 5, I found a box of letters in my mom's attic. My mother and me always had a very strong relationship while I was growing up. My dad was never in the picture, so it's always been her and I against the world. We lost her rather unexpectedly about 3 months ago, and my life has been a living hell ever since. Now, as I was cleaning out her house for us to move in, I located a box of letters in the attic. When I looked at the names scrawled at the top and bottom of each, I was amazed. They were written to me from my mother. They begin exactly a year before her death, and the last one is written on the very day she died. To say I am freaked out is an understatement. They are a bit all over the place because my mom was always scatterbrained. The last year of her life, she really began to lose her mind. I thought she was just crazy or something, but now I'm not entirely sure she was. I hadn't spoken to her for months before she died. She didn't even come to the hospital when I had my daughter, Brooke. She never even got a chance to meet her before she died. She kept herself in her house, not allowing anyone to come in. I was so mad at her for ignoring her new granddaughter and me. I couldn't believe that she'd blown me off for almost half a year. These letters let me into her mind during that time. The 13th of June 2017. Meredith. I don't know exactly why I am writing you these letters. I just have this horrible feeling that something will be happening soon. I'm not really sure exactly what to tell you. I think I will be gone soon, and I want you to have these letters to remember me. You haven't told me yet, but I already know that you're pregnant. I could see it written in your face the last time you and Stephen came over for dinner. I don't know why you didn't tell me, but that's okay. It can be fun to keep those kinds of secrets to yourselves for a while. I've begun having dreams. They started about a week ago. In them, I'm just sitting in my room, watching TV. I'm unable to look out the window, but I assume it is night time. I don't feel sleepy, though. I can't shake the feeling that I am being watched, and as I look through the house, I notice that all the doors and windows are boarded up. My lights are all off as well as any sound to the television. Suddenly, I hear 3 loud knocks at the door. My gut tells me not to answer, but my feet move towards it regardless. When I undo the 7 locks I've put on the door, it slams open. A dark figure stands on my porch, a long blade in his hand. I see the whites of his teeth as he grins widely. God. The smile was enough to scar me for life. At this point, I always wake up. I have never gotten further in the dream. I don't know what to make of it. Maybe it is from reading those scary stories before bed, or my anxiety over home invasions. Regardless, it continues to scare the absolute shit out of me. I know that you and I don't always see eye to eye, but I just want you to know that I love you so much. Mom. The 15th of July 2017. Meredith. You told me you were pregnant today. I know I blew you off about it, and I'm so sorry. The joy and happiness I am feeling cannot be put into words. I know you will be such an amazing mother, and if the baby looks anything like you, it will be absolutely gorgeous. I'm not positive, but I think it will be a girl. They tend to run in the family. I'm sorry to tell you that the dreams have continued. I am hardly sleeping anymore because I can't stand to see that smile every night. It haunts my dreams, making even the thought of sleeping something I do not want to do. I'm so tired, Mer. I wish that the dreams would just stop. I have gone to my therapist, and he prescribed me some sleeping pills. I think I will try to take one tonight and see what happens. Mom. The 16th of July 2017. Meredith. The sleeping pills were the worst idea ever. I took one, as prescribed last night, and had no trouble falling asleep. However, I found myself back in that God-forsaken dream again. Only this time, I didn't wake up after the smile. No, this time, the man shoved his way into my house. I still couldn't make out his face. It was as if no light could penetrate his body. He was just a moving shadow, making his way towards me, dragging along the ground. He grabbed me by my throat and shoved me hard against the wall. I woke up, gasping for air. I threw the pills out. Mom. Dash. The 30th of August 2017. Meredith. I was right. You guys texted me that it was a girl. I'm sorry I didn't reply, but I am just so tired. I want you to know how excited I am. I bet she'll be absolutely beautiful. I think that things have died down. I haven't had the dream in a few days and was finally able to catch up on some rest that I desperately needed. Mom. Dash. The 15th of September 2017. Meredith. I ventured out to the grocery store today. It's the first time I have left the house in over 2 weeks. On the way, I noticed a black SUV following me. I didn't think much of it, assuming they were also just going to the store. However, when I came out, they were still there. They followed me all the way back home. I've reported this to the police, but they say there isn't much they can do. They suggest I get a deadbolt for the door. Mom. Dash. The 25th of September 2017. Meredith. I caught a glimpse of someone outside my window last night. I have gotten darker curtains for all the windows as well as 2 locks for all the doors. I am scared that someone is trying to get to me. I haven't left the house since the grocery store incident. I am afraid that if I go outside, they will get me. The dreams have begun again and I am getting no sleep. I am exhausted, but sleep only means torture for me. I will continue to stay awake as long as I can. Mom. Dash. The 31st of October 2017. Meredith. I am still having the dreams. Sadly, I have gotten hardly any sleep since my last letter. I am going crazy. I know that lack of sleep can truly drive a person mad and I fear that's what's happening to me. I am seeing shadows move outside my house. It seems like I am always catching a last glimpse at shadows walking away or moving. I feel watched all the time. I have added more locks to the door, but I worry that won't be enough to keep them out. I received the picture you sent me. Your belly painted as a pumpkin was the cutest thing. I only wish I was able to see it in person, but I fear that they may get you too. Mom. Dash. The 17th of November 2017. Meredith. I got the call you went into labor, but I will not be coming to the hospital. I looked out the windows and the shadows are surrounding my home. I think they are ready to take me. I am not ready to go yet. I have ordered some wood online and will be boarding up all the possible entrances to my home. I can't risk them getting in. I hope to be in touch soon. Mom. Dash. The 25th of December 2017. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. I hope Brooke is doing well. She looks adorable in the pictures with Santa you sent me. I am sorry that I didn't call you on your birthday, but things were very hectic that week. I have boarded up the windows and doors. Now, they cannot get in. Mom. Dash. The 2nd of December 2018. Meredith. I'm sorry I haven't wrote you in a while. I am sorry I haven't called you in a while. I have shut my phone off. I am worried that they can somehow track me through it. I can't let them know where I am. I know that you are probably worried about me, but I am just trying to keep myself safe. I promise I will contact you as soon as it's safe. Mom. Dash. The 27th of March 2018. Meredith. They have found their way into my house. They continue to haunt my dreams as well. Asleep and awake, I cannot escape the hell that is my life. I have thought several times about just ending everything, but I couldn't do that to you. Hopefully, they don't take me from you. Mom. Dash. The 17th of April 2018. Meredith. I can't do this much longer. Mom. Dash. The 25th of May 2018. Help, they just won't go away. Mom. Dash. The 6th of January 2018. They're in my head. The shadow man is coming. The end is near. Mom. Dash. The 6th of September 2018. I have a feeling that it will be over soon. I'm so sorry I never got to meet my granddaughter. I do look at the photos you've sent me, almost every day. I love her so much. I just can't risk the shadows finding you and her. I will keep you safe until the day I die. I love you so much, Mer Bear. Mom. The 13th of June 2018. Mer. I'm writing this in the attic. I know tonight is the night and I hope you find these letters when I'm gone. I'll be going to my bedroom to wait. I love you so much. Mom. As it turns out, my mom was suffering from paranoid delusions and hallucinations. There was never anyone watching her or following her. Doctors estimate that she had not slept normally for approximately 8 months before she died. However, the police have found evidence that someone did show up to my mother's house that night and killed her. There was no machete, though, just one clean shot to the head. The suspect is still at large over 3 months later. I don't know how my mom knew she was going to die soon, but she did. I'm glad to still have these letters. Now I know that she still loved me. Now I know that when I showed up in a rage that night to confront her about abandoning my family, she knew I was coming. Story 6, Anne. When I was younger, I used to be best friends with a girl named Elizabeth Fairley. She lived just down the street, though that really wasn't saying much considering the size of my town. Roosterville, Missouri. It's such a small place that anyone who lives there is just down the street. The town was centered around the square which had the courthouse, an antique shop, and a few small, locally owned businesses. There was a bar on the corner with poorly blacked out windows and some neon signs on the door that never seemed to turn off. The bar was called Lucky's and the only reason why it stayed in business was because it was the only bar in town. There was one Baptist church and one Catholic church, and you could see just about everyone in the town when you showed up on a Sunday morning. Everyone knew everyone, and although nothing much happened, it wasn't a bad place to live. Elizabeth and I were like two peas in a pod. Even at that age, I could appreciate just how beautiful she was. With copper hair, fair skin kissed with freckles, and striking green eyes, she made anyone who stood next to her look dull in comparison. The only person in town who rivaled her beauty was her mother, Anne. But I always called her Mrs. F. Elizabeth was like the sun. Everywhere she went she radiated this brilliant energy and could light up a room simply with her smile. Elizabeth had an older brother named Peter, but he never wanted us around. Anytime Mr. F., otherwise known as Paul, would ask him to keep an eye on us, he would groan and say, "Ew. I don't want to hang out with little kids." Despite the fact that he was only a few years older than us. The Fairleys were a beautiful family. Even though Peter would always complain about spending time with Elizabeth and I, he always kept an eye out for us and really was protective of his little sister. It's amazing how such a perfect dynamic can be so fragile. It was late November when Elizabeth's mom passed away. I was 10 years old and I remember that it just wouldn't stop raining. It felt appropriate, like the sky was crying. At the funeral, Mr. Fairley gave an odd speech. He said that God was selfish for taking his wife away. Peter put on a brave face but his eyes were red and puffy. Elizabeth didn't really say anything, she just quietly wiped away her tears before anyone could even see that she had been crying. I had never had a death in my family, so I didn't really know what to do. When I approached Mrs. F's casket, all I can remember thinking was, "She's still so pretty." Her hands were folded up on her chest, her wedding ring accenting the delicate curvature of her fingers. It looked like she would sit up any minute and ask me if I wanted to stay for dinner. I couldn't process that she was dead. I didn't even cry when I looked onto her feminine features. Although, I knew that I was supposed to be sad. When I sat back down in the pew, I simply held Elizabeth's hand and tried my best to be of comfort. Elizabeth and I stopped playing after that. Her dad became strict. She was expected to come home immediately after school, and she wasn't allowed to spend the night at anyone's house. I would see her in school, but she hung her head so low that I wondered if she could even see my half-hearted waves in the hallway. Looking back, I wonder when it started. Could it have been all the way back then? I shudder at the thought. Peter became a school bully. He felt like the world had been unfair to him, so why should he be fair to anyone else? He never picked on me, but I certainly didn't talk with him either. Years went by, and I found new friends. I know that sounds awful, but I was just a kid. Besides, how was I supposed to maintain a friendship when she wouldn't even talk to me? I still watched her though. I felt awkward when I shared classes with her. I felt tense and odd. We used to be so close, but now I could hardly look at her without feeling this knot of guilt in my stomach. Elizabeth never really had any friends, but as she grew, she developed into an even more stunning young woman. She wasn't allowed to date, but that didn't stop boys from asking. Oddly enough, she would always tell them that she was seeing someone, but with a town that small, we all knew it was a lie. Once, I caught her kissing a boy behind the movie theater my freshman year, and the next day she came to school with a split lip. Of course, I didn't say anything. It was none of my business. Shortly after, Elizabeth was pulled from school. I moved away for college. I was filled with wanderlust and resented that I hadn't been able to travel outside of tiny old Roosterville. My first semester I drank too much, smoked pot for the first time, and barely made it to class. All in all, I enjoyed myself and had completely forgotten about Elizabeth, the Fairleys, everything. Until I visited home for Thanksgiving. I caught up with old friends, and at about 18 or 19 years old, we had to sneak liquor out of the back of Lucky's since everyone in town knew we were underage. Fake IDs weren't really an option. We piled up into my friend Sam's car and he drove us to Liberty Hill, a quiet little place that overlooked the whole town. The only downside was that it bordered the cemetery. As we passed around the cheap booze, Sam slurred his words as he spoke. You know what fucking pisses me off? He had all of our attention, a few of us already cracking grins. Sam had always been the funny one in our group, after all. Motherfucking Elizabeth Fairley. I felt uneasy, but the rest of the group urged him on, so I simply sipped my lukewarm beer and kept my mouth shut. I had the biggest crush on that bitch in hitch school, right? Man, I swear I used to ask her out 3 times a year. Listen, SHH. But the thing is, every time, she told me she was already seeing someone. There were a few hoops and hollers from the group. But I didn't ever see her with nobody. I'm not a bad-looking guy. Right? There were a few jokes made, but either Sam was too drunk, or just didn't care. I shifted nervously in my seat. Now though, she's walking around with some fugly baby, with a ring on her hand. Whatever ugly bastard she banged, must be loaded. 'Cause if she's walking around with a baby like that, you know it takes after its dad. Laughter erupted from the group, but I simply sat there confused. She had a baby? Not only that, but she was married? It all seemed off. If she never left Roosterville, there was no way she had a kid. Not with her dad as strict as he was. I always thought that she simply said she was seeing someone so that people would just leave her alone. It just wasn't possible. I'm not entirely sure why it all rattled me so much. Maybe because the Elizabeth I had preserved in my memory was still just a small child. Maybe because I always imagined, or hoped, that she would escape this town and find some celebrity husband who would be struck with her looks. I don't know. Regardless, I made up my mind to finally go see her after all this time. I knocked on the door of her old house, not even completely certain that she still lived there. However, when the door creaked open a sliver, I was rewarded with slightly startled green eyes peeking at me. My throat tensed and all of the words I had planned on saying dried up in my mouth. Thankfully, after a few moments, the door opened and Elizabeth simply stood astounded and said, "Is that really you, Lauren?" I nodded and fumbled over my greeting, which made Elizabeth smile. A smile, which I hadn't seen in practically a decade. My heart skipped a beat, and as I took in how much she had grown, I noticed a small bundle of blankets she clutched to her chest. She bounced it slightly and there was a slight stirring in the fabric. I asked if I could come inside and talk, but she seemed hesitant. After a quick glance behind her, she paused. I reached in my purse and pulled out a pack of Milk Duds, her favorite. Or at least, they were when she was 8. Shaking the box, I felt a bit silly having made the assumption that her tastes hadn't changed since childhood. I brought your favorite. She smiled a painfully sorrowful and nostalgic smile before she ushered me in, asking me if we could keep quiet since her father was still sleeping. I agreed, and as we made our way to the living room, I felt like I had traveled back in time. I hadn't been in the Farley house since I was a kid, but everything was just as I remembered it. On the carpet, there was still a slight stain from where I had spilled my juice running with Elizabeth from Peter, who had threatened to give us wet willies for hogging the TV. The whole place was simply preserved in time. Sitting down on the couch, I felt out of place. Elizabeth said nothing, and I feared that I was being rude. As she pat the blankets in her arms, I saw the ring on her finger. It seemed familiar, but I couldn't quite figure out why. Shrugging it off, I fidgeted before asking her how she was. She said good, and the silence engulfed us again. I took a deep breath before I said what I had been wanting to say to her for years. Look, I don't really know if this still matters to you or not, but I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. Elizabeth froze and looked at me with confusion. I know it was a long time ago, but I feel like I was a bad friend to you. You know, after after your mother died, I kinda left you out to dry. So yeah. I'm sorry. I guess I just wanted to check up on you. I see that you're married. So, congrats. With eyes filled with both relief and dread, her smile faltered and I saw tears well up in her emerald eyes. You're the first one. I really missed being friends with you, you know that. But Paul, he needs things to be a certain way. You can understand that, right? I frowned and her baby started to babble in irritation. Paul? Oh. Your old man. I know, it must have been hard on you too, but still. It was a bit much, don't you think? Her baby started to cry as she rocked it, the blanket fell, and for the first time, I saw its face. I have always loved babies, but this thing, was unlike anything I had ever seen. Its head was too long and misshapen. Its cries were distorted by the shape of its protruding jaw. Obviously, the infant had no teeth, so with the severity of its underbite, its mouth was grotesquely large and drool pooled down the side of its face. As the baby wailed and writhed in its mother's arms, she set it down on the sofa, trying to soothe its gurgled shrieks. As it continued to thrash, it kicked away the blanket some more. At first, I didn't know what I was looking at, but then it dawned on me. It didn't have any legs. Instead, it had this mass of tissue that frantically squirmed along with the infant's crying. At the end, there were feet-like masses, with a few chunks of flesh that in another child, would be toes. The look of horror must have been apparent on my face, because she began to quickly wrap it and her face burned with shame. However, all of that color drained when we heard a slight rustling from a room down the hall. Looking at me with nothing but pure terror, she whispered, "You need to leave." And with that, she scooped up that creature, and forcibly pushed me out towards the door. I sputtered out a few words of shock and protest when I hear her father. He had just woken up, but he already sounded irate. "Anne, is someone with you?" She swung open the door, and I nearly ate concrete with the amount of force she pushed me onto her front porch. With fear in her eyes, she begged me in one final whisper, "Please, don't tell anyone. And don't come back." I stood there completely dumbfounded, but my feet began to move on their own, making their way back to my parents' house. I never told anyone, or at least, until today. I thought, the image of Elizabeth's baby would leave my mind as soon as I came back to school. I was naive. I've been graduated for 2 years now, and I still see it when I lay in bed. My imagination has only been cruel, and I hope that perhaps time has simply taken its toll on a fear, and that maybe the child has only been warped even further by my memory. Although I know that's naive too. It wasn't until recently that I remembered why the ring on her finger had bothered me so much. It was her mother's. Story 7, Don't play the tunnel game. If you're like me, and if you're reading this you probably are, you've most likely heard of the tunnel game by now. I've always been interested in those dark magic games like the elevator game, playing hide and seek with demons, and the one about calling a taxi. I've always had fun trying these games, but of course none of them actually worked for me. Regardless, I was always on the lookout for a new game to try, and when I read about the tunnel game I decided to play right away. The game is simple: find a tunnel, draw a salt line across one of the entrances, light 5 candles on the salt line, and burn a piece of paper with your blood on it. After the game starts, the actual gameplay consists of trying to escape the tunnel despite horrific visions. The real trick is this: the tunnel never stays the same. Usually it flips upside down or sideways, but some say their tunnels had turned into caves, forests, and even intestinal tracts of enormous demonic beasts. I don't know what most people's reactions to a story like that would be, but it sounded awesome to me. I immediately started looking for a suitable tunnel, and my Google search turned up an abandoned train tunnel not too far out of town. By this point it was only noon on a Saturday, so I decided to go try it the same evening. I grabbed my extra candles, a lot of these games call for them, a box of salt, and my bundle of rope left over from the taxi game, and threw them into the trunk of my car. Now, normally I'd read some more accounts or watch videos from other players before making my own attempt, but at this point I considered myself something of a veteran, and besides, nothing had ever happened to me before. I got to the tunnel a little before sunset. It was probably a 10-minute walk from the parking lot, but I could still hear the highway, so it barely felt like I was even in the woods at all. The tunnel was about 10, maybe 12 feet across and about 20 feet high. The rails had been ripped out years ago. I spilled the salt line, lit the candles, and bloodied a scrap of paper with my finger and a needle. The rope I tied around my waist and to a strong-looking tree next to the tunnel. Someone had suggested it as a way to help find the exit. It probably saved my life. I stood just outside the tunnel to prep myself before starting. I patted my pockets and realized I'd left my flashlight in the car, but decided to just get it over with quickly rather than go back for it. Besides, I had my phone for an emergency. I stepped over the salt line, knelt before the middle candle, and touched the blood-soaked paper scrap to the flame. It went up immediately, which was surprising, but nothing else seemed to happen. The gaping darkness of the tunnel still yawned behind me and the twilight forest stretched before it. I shifted and it felt like I couldn't quite get a good grip with my right shoe, like I was standing on a steep slope. Then my left shoe joined it, and suddenly I was off balance, slipping and sliding deeper into the tunnel. The forest stretched away rapidly until the rope caught and jerked me to a halt. The floor kept moving though, falling away, and I finally found my voice to yell. I tried to grab at the ground, but my nails just scrambled uselessly against gravel and dirt. Reality finally gave out and the floor fell fully away, leaving only the rope keeping me from falling with it. The world stopped shifting and I was left dangling in the dead center of the tunnel. I looked back or down, or whatever, and saw the entrance to the tunnel. I looked up and saw the dark of the deeper tunnel with my thin cordage hanging from deep in the shadows. Was it just a vision? Had the tunnel flipped that way too? I looked back again and only the center candle, now seemingly stuck to the wall along with the salt line, was lit. Well, that didn't seem right, so, up? I don't know why, but even in my paralyzed state all I could think was that I needed proof that it had worked. I took my phone out of my pocket, but before I could even open the camera it tumbled from my hand and disappeared in the now dark forest. I grasped the rope and hugged it, squeezing my eyes closed. With a deep breath I reopened my eyes. A smoky palm was outstretched before my face, reaching for my skull. I jerked back, as much as I could, and it quickly withdrew to the wall. No more hands seemed to be reaching from the walls, but regardless I decided to finally start trying to escape. The rope disappeared quickly beneath me, which was more confusing than anything. I've never been very strong, and even with the adrenaline I'd expected more of a struggle. I looked down again, but the candles were all gone. A lone light still shone just above the ground from far away. The tunnel shook around me as a deep horn sounded. Gravel and bits of debris fell past, striking my head and arms. I resumed climbing, wondering just what was beneath me. The horn blew again and damp, moldy leaves and stick fell through the darkness. This time I didn't stop climbing as I looked, and now the light was much closer. Was a train running up at me? I reached for another pull and my hand screamed in pain. Blood fell in my eyes as I tried to see the cause. I felt like the rope was coated in glass shards like a kite line. The train horn blasted again, sounding very near. Sickly sweet-smelling red bits fell past me, and a severed eye bounced off my shoulder. Struggling not to puke, I continued to pull on the rope, fresh wounds scoring my other hand. Suddenly it felt like I was pulling my full weight and my breath was quickly coming in short gasps. Lights fell from above and quickly resolved into burning pieces of bloody paper. I blinked against the ash and suddenly the salt line, 5 burning candles and all, was just a few yards above me. My rope stretched almost directly over one of the flickering flames and I could see an ashy mark around a quickly fraying section. A strand snapped and I dropped an inch. The train horn sounded again, deafening me and drowning my screams. The rope was much nearer to what was once the floor now, so I tried to reverse rappel up the wall. My feet wildly flailed against the gravel as my frayed and bloody hands struggled to keep a grip. Another strand snapped, throwing me back a foot, and now I could clearly hear the wheels of the train fast approaching. The headlight of the train fell across me and the rest of the tunnel. The floor wriggled with maggots and rotting meat. Tears streamed down my face and my bloody hands slipped on the rope. The train blew its horn for what I could tell was going to be the last time. I gasped for air, but it tasted like thick wood smoke, choking me. With the last of my failing strength I screamed and heaved myself forward. I reached for the salt line, but the train approached and I felt it slam into my feet and I blacked out. I don't know for how long. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor of the train tunnel right behind the salt line. Gravity was normal, and the severed, burnt end of the rope lay before me. The candles were still burning well, so it couldn't have been more than an hour or two. Total. 10 feet or so of rope lay behind me with the nearest 3 feet covered in blood. I looked at my hands, but they were clean with no sign of damage. I scrambled to my feet and dashed forward. I tripped over the salt line and collapsed outside the tunnel. I just laid there and breathed for a while, free of the dark confines of the tunnel at last. I thought I heard a distant train horn blow and I started. It must have just been my imagination. But I still got back up and looked around. The woods were silent and too dark to return to my car without a light. I reached for my phone, but it was still gone. There was no way I was going back in there to look, so I just grabbed a candle and left. Luckily, the air was still and I quickly got back to my car. After just sitting, sobbing in the safety of the driver's seat for a while, I finally drove home, abandoning my gear to the forest. The next morning I started writing this. But, when I took a break about halfway through, I noticed the notepad next to my desk. There's a blood stain in the lower right-hand corner, shaped just like the scrap I burned to start the game. In fact, all of my papers are like that, even the money in my wallet. I guess I lost the game. I don't know what to do now. Am I trapped in the other world where the train came from? Should I try the taxi game again to get home? I don't know. But please, for your own sake, don't play the tunnel game. Story 8, I'm pretty sure my niece is trying to kill me. Here's the thing, I love kids. I love being around them, playing with them, watching them learn new things. I even used to work as a nanny during college to help make ends meet. But I have never, ever, wanted children of my own. I don't know why I don't want kids. I just never did. My husband is the same way. We assumed when we first got married that maybe we'd want kids at some point, but 12 years later, things still haven't changed. We have great jobs and we travel a lot, and we're happy. Kids just don't fit into our equation. My twin sister, on the other hand, has always wanted kids. Cassie had my niece, Audrey, the same year my husband and I got married. She was thrilled even though the pregnancy wasn't planned and she wasn't married to Audrey's father. She didn't even think it was possible for her to get pregnant. Her doctor told her she would never conceive, but even if she did, it would end in miscarriage. Cut to 2 years after that conversation and Cassie gives birth to a beautiful, healthy baby girl. She named her Audrey after the actress Audrey Hepburn, and it fits her. She's got dark hair, has always been slim for her age, and except for having dark blue eyes, could easily pass as one of Hepburn's descendants. 36 hours of labor and Cassie nearly dying, and out comes this beautiful little girl, healthy as can be. Even though it took Cassie a year to fully recover from birth, I'd never seen her so happy and feeling so grateful that her prayers were answered for a child. But Audrey's miraculous birth isn't the subject of this story. I wish it was. No, it's about the fact that this kid is trying to kill me. Before I get to what's been happening in the last 2 weeks, let me give you the rundown on Audrey. Audrey is not an exceptional child. She's normal, a little mature for her age, but nothing crazy. She started talking at a year old, potty trained within 20 months, and so on. She was rarely sick as a baby and she was always a mama's girl, but that's to be expected. Cassie never married Audrey's father and we're not sure where he is anyway. Audrey didn't start changing until about a year ago, right around her 10th birthday. I've been around her since she was born, so I noticed it right away, the changes. My husband didn't until I pointed out what was going on at my sister's house. You see, my sister is the kind of person who watches paranormal stories on YouTube. She's been into ghosts and Ouija boards and everything like that since we were kids. She binges them when Audrey's asleep, and usually when I call her, she's watching one. Right before Audrey's 10th birthday, Cassie bought an old Ouija board. I know, what the hell was she thinking, right? That was my first question. But Cassie lives in a really old house right outside town and some weird stuff was happening. She thought her house was haunted and thought using a Ouija board would help her figure it out. I guess I should have told her what happened the time I used one, but that's for a different story. So Cassie buys this Ouija board and uses it. And you guessed it, Audrey was at home, asleep. I called her the day after she used it and she complained that nothing had happened. She thought maybe she'd done it wrong and asked me if I wanted to give it a try with her. I told her no thank you and she shouldn't be playing it with Audrey in the house. She then told me she'd throw it away when she went to work because even though nothing happened, she was creeped out by having the board in her house. That week I dropped by to take care of Audrey while Cassie went on a date with a new boyfriend. Trent, I think his name was. Audrey didn't seem fond of him and to my surprise, she told him that to his face. She also said that if he hurt her mommy, the man that lived in her attic would make sure that Trent was very sorry. Cassie and Trent left before she could say anything, and to be honest, I don't blame them. That night was relatively normal right up until Audrey brought me the Ouija board as we were settling down to watch a Disney movie. Honey, where did you get this? I asked her as she pulled out the planchette. Out of the trash, she said, shrugging. Well, I don't think we should be playing with this, I said, taking the planchette out of her hand. It's not safe. Mommy played with it. But Mommy shouldn't have, I said, taking the board and planchette outside and locking them in the trunk of my car. And that should have been that. But it wasn't. I put Audrey to sleep after the movie, and while she'd been a little upset about the board, she had calmed down by the time the movie finished. Auntie Rose? Yes, sweetheart. I sat on the edge of her bed and looked at her. Do you hate kids? What? No. I was shocked by the question. Audrey wasn't a naturally curious kid, so the question was out of character for her. Who told you that? No one, she said after a long silence. Well, the board told me. The board? Yeah. Mommy says it doesn't work, but it's not meant for grown-ups. It's meant for kids, she said, turning over. Well, that's wrong. I love kids, I said, but as soon as I finished my sentence, I could hear her snoring. As I left her room, I remember saying, "What a weirdo." Which was probably my first mistake. When Cassie got home, I told her what Audrey said to me. Cassie was a little concerned that the Ouija board got back in the house because she told me she'd thrown it away at work. I showed her that I'd taken the board and put it in my car. That's when Cassie's face went pale. That's not the same board, she said, looking in my trunk. She looked at me. I bought one at the toy store. The traditional kind, you know. This looks homemade. That freaked me out a bit, but I told her not to worry about it, that I'd throw it away on my way home. She just nodded and went back inside. As I got in my car, I could see Audrey in the second floor window of her room. She waved at me and I waved back, then made my way home. I could write a million words about how weird the car accident I got into was, but I don't have space, so let me just summarize it. I was on the highway heading home when I got to my exit. I had to cross over the bridge to head into my neighborhood. I eased off the accelerator, so I could slow down, but the car sped up. I stamped on the brakes and they did not work at all. I didn't have time to react as my car veered into traffic and slammed into the side of the bridge. Somehow, my car managed to jump the barrier and end up back on the highway. The impact should have killed me, and even then the massive car pileup that happened after should have killed me, but neither did. Instead, I suffered a few broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder I'd end up having to get surgery on. At the hospital, my husband showed up and was just as confused as I was to how the whole thing happened. After the police and the insurance agency finished their respective investigations later that week, they found that my brake lines and my steering column had been tampered with. They just didn't know who did it. And then Cassie came to see me at home. She looked really upset, and when I asked her what was wrong, she pulled out a Ziploc bag and handed it to me. "I found this in Audrey's room when I was cleaning up," she said quietly. Inside the Ziploc bag were a pair of scissors, a bottle of clear liquid, wire cutters, and blue and red wires. Also in the bag was a drawing done by Audrey's own hand. I have them on my fridge and I can tell it was her work, that showed me, lying beside my car, covered in red crayon. I know it's blood, but it's hard to admit, you know. I was freaked the hell out for sure, but I mean, she was turning 10. She's still a kid. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. So I asked Cassie if she talked to Audrey about it. She said that she had, and that Audrey had told her that the man in the attic did it for calling her a weirdo. Cassie was so upset that I didn't bother asking more questions. She just said that Audrey had been, at that point, acting a little weird. She was sleepwalking up to the attic, she was a little withdrawn, she wasn't playing with her friends as often as she had before. Cassie was really worried. So I told her to take Audrey to a shrink. I told her that obviously I couldn't be her psychologist. I'm a neuropsychiatrist and I specialize in psychopaths, not a great fit for a 10-year-old. But I did give her a referral. Cassie took her, and for a while, it worked. A few months passed and I was busy at work, going to conferences, and my husband and I spent 3 months in Europe, so I didn't get to see Cassie and Audrey until just 3 months ago. By the time Harry and I saw Audrey again, the change was remarkable. I mean, I knew things were changing. Cassie and I kept up even though I was busy. Audrey wasn't as withdrawn, but their house was still haunted. It got so bad that they ended up moving closer to us into a big house just a few streets over. When I walked into the house the first time since getting back from our trip, the first thing I saw was Audrey. She'd grown quite a bit since the last time I saw her, and she was nearly as tall as I was at 5 feet 2 inches. She was happy, too, her eyes smiling as soon as she saw me. "Hi Auntie Rose," she said, giving me a huge hug. We never spoke about the accident or anything, and at that moment, I was just too happy to see her to bring it up. "Wanna see my room?" I said sure, and as Harry was talking to Cassie in the kitchen, I headed upstairs. I walked into Audrey's bedroom to see a beautiful mural that she'd done on one wall. It was gorgeous, beautifully rendered, showing a meadow with huge trees and animals of all kinds all over the wall. Audrey left me in there for a minute so she could grab her sketchbook. Cassie had taken her to Disney World while we'd been away, and she spent a lot of the time sketching. While she was gone, I let myself finally feel how weird the house felt. It didn't feel like anyone was watching you, but you do better to watch your step. And here's where I made my second mistake. I noticed that part of the mural was hanging off and someone had tried to glue a piece of wallpaper over it. I went over to the corner and lifted up the piece. What I saw still makes me throw up. It was a drawing of a woman who looked like me hanging from a metal chain noose from a swing set at a playground. Under me was a drawing of Audrey, holding another length of the metal chain and laughing. Underneath the entire drawing were the words "Aunt Rose's death, what are you doing?" Audrey's voice startled me and I stood up, turning around and hoping she didn't catch me. "Oh, there's a piece of wallpaper hanging off and I was sticking it back on," I said. I was trying to sound casual, but I don't know how well I did with that. The mural is so pretty that I wanted to make sure it stayed together. "Oh, okay," she said. "Mom says it's time for dinner." I helped. The rest of the time I was at Cassie's house, I felt really uncomfortable. I tried to play it off but my husband caught on and suggested that we leave a little early. Cassie and Audrey looked disappointed but we reminded them we'd be back for Audrey's birthday, which is in a few weeks. I had never been so happy to get away from my niece, but it wouldn't last. That night, I got extremely sick. I mean, throwing up blood and bile, shaking so hard my husband couldn't keep me still. It got so bad that when my vision went and my throat began to close up, Harry bundled me into the car and took me to the hospital. When I woke up 5 days ago, the doctors told me that my food had been laced with antifreeze and that if my husband hadn't taken me to the hospital, I would have died. Antifreeze. Right away I suspected Audrey, but I told myself that I was being silly. I mean, she's about to be 11, still a kid, right? No way she'd want to kill me. But, now, after everything that's happened in the last 2 weeks, I'm not so sure. No one else that night had gotten sick, just me. I usually have to make my own meals because I have food allergies and Cassie knows about them, which means that Audrey, who made my meal, should know about them too. But this wasn't an allergic reaction to a food. This was antifreeze. And here's another thing, Audrey's been sleepwalking from her house to my house. Every night for the last 2 weeks, one of us will find her either in the living room, in my office, and as of 3 nights ago, in our bedroom. And last night, Audrey had a hammer in her hand when I woke up to find her on my side of the bed. But Audrey never has a key on her when we find her. The alarm is never tripped. She never seems surprised that she's in our house. She doesn't seem to be fazed by anything. Now here comes the part where I ask for advice. Cassie needs to go away for work. It's a big project and she'll be gone for 4 days, coming home just in time for Audrey's birthday. The kid needs some place to stay. Harry volunteered us before I could say anything. He forgot that he's going to a conference in New York City for the week. I can't say no to taking care of my own niece, but I'm pretty sure she's trying to kill me. First the car accident, then the weird drawing, and now antifreeze? Cassie says that Audrey doesn't even know where that is and they don't have any in the house, so there's no way she did it. But she did do it. I know she did it. So what do I do now? Audrey is staying for 4 days, plenty of time for her to try something. I don't know what I can do without looking like I've lost my mind. I know this was long, but thanks for sticking until the end. I'll be sure to update tomorrow if anything happens. Story 9, I lost contact with the Earth 18 hours ago. This is Commander Ryan Abbott of the International Space Station. I've been the sole crew member aboard for the past 7 months as it orbited 286 miles above the planet's surface. This will probably be my last log entry. I suspect no one will ever see it since I believe every single human on Earth is dead. Still, I'm compelled to record this journal entry as the final formality of my record-keeping duties here. Hopefully I'm wrong about everything. About 18 hours ago, I was awakened by the vessel's artificial intelligence computer system. Max warned me that something wasn't right. When I prodded for details, he explained that all transmissions on Earth had ceased. All civilian and military radio signals were silent. Not a soul was broadcasting audio or video. For the next couple hours I tried to reach NASA and the other international partners of the ISS. Nothing. Like Dickens' Christmas Carol, no one was stirring, not even a mouse. I went from slightly concerned at the beginning, to highly disturbed, and finally in full-blown panic as time wore on. Even syrupy crooning and flamenco guitar music from Latin America would have been a relief to hear. Instead there was nothing but dead air on all terrestrial bandwidth frequencies. I considered that it could be due to internal equipment malfunction, but the station had dual independent receivers to prevent that possibility. Neither digital system detected any commercial or private broadcasts. A third, much older, manual system I pulled out of storage confirmed Max's chilling report. Air flights and control towers across the globe were off the air. The entire Earth was silent. The monotone hiss from the speaker was deafening. Since ISS has multiple cameras to record the atmospheric weather patterns at all times, I decided to back up the recording. I wanted to see when everything changed. Max didn't want to stop the live recording at first. His duty is to maintain a continuous feed at all costs, but if there was ever a time to subvert the system, it was then. After explaining the importance of understanding why the Earth went silent, he agreed. I'm in charge, after all. He's nothing like Hal from 2001, A Space Odyssey. In the past, the two of us even made jokes about the legendary film reference. I think he gets it. I'd grown reasonably used to being alone since he was there to keep me company, in his own way. Every person I knew was only 286 miles away, give or take a few thousand. Now I only have Max, and the possibility terrifies me. I started reviewing the archived footage around the time I originally retired to my bunk for sleep. As far as I knew, everything was perfectly fine on the Earth until that point. About 2 hours into my sleep, a piercing beam of light enveloped one whole side of the planet like an artificial sun. Actually, it completely eclipsed our natural sunlight. It paled in comparison. As the Earth rotated, this light seemed to cook the surface like a hydrogen-infused laser. From that point on, there were no more transmissions recorded from our shiny blue home. Cameras on the orbiting International Space Station had surreptitiously captured the extinction of mankind, save one. It was as if the whole planet had been sterilized by the mystery flash of light from outer space. This sanitation of humanity took less than 6 hours from what I could tell. I asked Max why he didn't wake me while the unexplained phenomena was going on. Perhaps proving that artificial intelligence still has a long way to go, he expressed genuine concern that I needed the sleep. It's not like I could have physically blocked the devastating light wave from my little tin can in the sky, but perhaps I could have warned those not already under its mysterious influence. Max seemed proud that he had the presence of mind to alert me when he noticed the absence of radio transmissions. In his cyber-based cognizance, his decision was thinking outside the box, despite my biological need for sleep. He didn't immediately grasp the reason for my considerable agitation. As if speaking to a small child, I tried to explain that the lack of radio wave broadcasts, now, and the extreme light phenomena, then, were almost certainly related. Here I am facing the potential extinction of mankind, and possibly all other animal life forms on Earth, and yet I didn't want to hurt his feelings. Go figure. Max seemed to finally come around. He was concerned that our mission on the ISS would be compromised if there were no other people left on Earth to share the data results with. That helped to bring the concept of unknown and fear to him. In his defense, there's only one of him, so losing humanity doesn't have quite the same punch as it does for me. I kept hoping for a return of regular radio transmissions and electronic signatures. I listened to that unwavering, gut-wrenching static for hours. Just as I had decided that hearing nothing over the airwaves was undeniable proof of the end of everything, things grew infinitely worse. My repeated calls to our space station partners across the globe has went unanswered for hours. Then out of the blue, a single, cryptic response came. I should have been relieved beyond words. The problem was, the response wasn't words at all. Not from any human tongue. If I had to describe the language of what I heard over the speakers, it would be that of a sinister insect-like screech. The response kept repeating. It was absolutely directed at me. As if on cue, Max began receiving tens of thousands of radio transmissions from all over the globe. They were similar in nature to the insectoid screeching message I'd received from the space station command center. There were no humans manning the microphones down on Earth. Max expressed confusion and concern. Even he realized the transmissions were not normal. Not by any stretch. He has the learning capacity to analyze unique vocal patterns and unknown dialects. He was already deep into transcribing the broadcasts he was recording. What he told me about them made the thought of being the last human being even worse. As if that was even possible. A giant interstellar species of flying creatures has transported to Earth in their quest for a new home. Like a swarm of traveling locusts, they drift from planet to planet, taking control of each new world and decimate its natural resources. Earth is their newest target. Perhaps in their zeal to take over the planet, I'd escaped their attention. Now, I had inadvertently announced my presence. In a misunderstanding that would be hilarious if it were not the most tragic thing in the world, Max mimicked his best imitation of excitement. "They said that they are coming for you," he exclaimed. With the world of humanity over, he was genuinely worried I would be stranded on the space station by the new insect overlords. I didn't have the strength to explain what their message meant. In his level of understanding, the extinction of humanity wasn't that a big deal as long as there was other biological creatures to coexist with. I'd never be able to explain that I had no intention of living among these locust-like conquerors, nor do they have any intention of letting me live. Max needed many more years to achieve that sophisticated level of comprehension. I regret that he'll never get the chance. I've grown very fond of him. I'm hoping there is still some underground resistance left among our species to take the Earth back. Unfortunately, I have no way of knowing about that, but I plan on blowing up the station when they arrive. Even if I only take out a few of them in the explosion, it will be my independent effort to help. At the end of this entry, I'll sign off for the last time and transmit my log file to ISS headquarters. I can only hope there are other survivors left to view this recording and benefit from my plan. Commander Ian Abbott, International Space Station. August 18, 2023. Story 10, Fakes on a Plane. I left my boss to die today. That probably sounds really bad, but I'm not so sure that it is. And it's not like I did anything to hurt her. I just didn't do anything to stop her, either. I should probably explain something before we get too far into this. I'm a psychic. Not a fake one, not a sit around the table holding hands, do a palm reading, read the stars type of psychic. I've never liked any of that spiritualist shit because it's too tidy. Being a real psychic is breaking into a cold sweat when you shake someone's hand and learn a bit too much about them at a job interview. Being a real psychic is waking up screaming in the middle of the night so often that it's impossible to keep a live-in partner. Being a real psychic doesn't make you money or make you famous. It makes you miserable. So guess what I do for a living? I work for the most esteemed fake psychic on the West Coast. She and her bevy of underlings can cold read and warm read their ways into the hearts and pocketbooks of just about anybody who comes their way. There's this podunk town up the I-5 from Los Angeles whose police department swears my boss solved one of their cold cases. She has a fake gold key to the city on her desk still, brazenly etched with her stage name, Crystal Powers. Her real name is Melanie, but I'm the only one who calls her that. If you were to see us out on a call, Melanie would be the tall, bangle-wearing, wavy-haired brunette with fake-colored contact lenses to give her wide-eyed deliveries of doom and gloom just a bit more pop. I, the lowly assistant, would be trailing behind her, holding a notebook and a smartphone or two. My boss loves me because I'm just so organized, honey. That, and my tendency to sway like I'm seasick when I follow her on house calls to tortured and active places. She's very sensitive to the vibrations here. Melanie will coo as I try not to vomit. Later, she'll thank me for my theatrics. As her assistant, I take most of the calls and book most of her appointments and TV spots. That means that the past month has been absolute hell for me, because I've been planning SICON, the largest gathering of the world's intuitive consultants, as they've all branded themselves recently. Even they want to distance themselves from spiritualism, I guess. SICON is happening in Vegas this year, because Melanie is all about appropriate settings. She picked the city, and I planned the rest of the event, from venue to hotel discounts for speakers. Everything. I don't think I've gotten 8 hours of sleep more than once a week for the past 8 months. Though. That may not be a problem for me anymore. We were supposed to leave for the con this morning, to check in early and oversee the final preparations before it opened tomorrow. Only I had a vision. I know. Bear with me, a real bad one. I'm not going to describe it all at once, because I have some things to say about Melanie as we go. But you know how it ends, so that probably won't be an issue. Scenes like the one I saw this morning come to me most easily when I'm in light sleep. If I'm awake, I usually only feel what has happened, either from the setting or from the people around me. But when I'm sleeping, I get glimpses of what's going to happen. And don't let that anything's possible, you can change your own future. Shit give you hope, because everything I have ever seen has come true. Everything. I wake up screaming a lot. Those are not good odds. You know how dream scenes will just fluidly melt from one to another when you're sleeping? 1 second you're shopping for a blanket for your bed, and then suddenly you're sitting in the plane seat you booked for yourself. Honestly, I hope the majority of you have more interesting dreams than I do. Then the sound comes in, a bit tinny and warped, like it's being heard through a thin wall of water. My boss is in the seat next to me. She stares at me for a few moments with a deep frown on her face. Eventually, she grabs one of her phones and punches one to speed dial me. Jaya, sweetie, where are you? I watch as she contorts her face into a smile to make herself sound friendly over the phone. And she does. Sound friendly. I parrot words I don't know I'm about to say. At home, why? Well, because I'm sitting here on our flight with an empty seat next to me, honey, and I was just getting worried about you. I pause as my brain catches up to what's happening. When I realize that I'm not actually in the seat, and that she can't see me at all, I open my mouth and let the reply come, oh. You're on the plane? Yep, all the girls are. We've got the big conference tomorrow, remember? Oh, I say again, slightly distracted by the arrival of a flight attendant holding a mimosa, which is received by Melanie without so much as a thank you. My boss downs the entire thing before she replies again, still with that skeletal smile. You feeling okay? This isn't like you. And there it is. My out. I don't know why I need one, not yet, but I know I shouldn't sound relieved. I do anyway. No, actually. I feel pretty terrible. Melanie grimaces before freezing her face back into that phone smile. Well, look. I really need your help with this conference, hun, but we can't have you sick. Why don't you take the night to feel better and catch the commuter flight tomorrow morning? Just bill the ticket to the company card. Melanie, perfect, honey. See you tomorrow. She ends the call, and the words die on my lips. I've lost my ability to reply. I know that I need to reach her and let her know that something is terribly wrong, but before I can even work out how, she keeps talking. Flaky brat, she mutters, cramming her phone into her purse and letting that plastic smile melt from her face. The anger those words summoned within me was enough to jolt me awake. Flaky brat. It's not the first time I've seen her demean me. She never has to my face, but behind my back she's always calling me names. Could a flaky brat have organized the event that's about to make her a sickening amount of money? I don't even want to tell you how expensive the tickets to Sicken are. You'd gag. Could a flaky brat deal with her every whim, all day, every day? I think that's what killed my desire to help. I've been dealing with her for years, and she has rewarded me with a false face of praise, shit pay, and terrible words spoken about me when I'm not there. I've stood silent for years as she defrauded people of their money. I've done everything she's ever wanted, and I am still just the flaky brat. Let's see how you manage without me, then. Decision made, I turned off my alarm, rolled over, and went back to sleep. I should have stayed awake. Whatever controls my insight into the future seemed to have locked onto Melanie, and the moment I passed back out, I found myself back in the empty seat beside her. A man across the aisle fades into view as though the entire scene were made of fog. That sounded fun. The man flashes perfect teeth at Melanie in a sympathetic grin, and I can practically smell the sense of opportunity radiating out from her like some sort of ambition pheromone. She takes a moment to look him over. It's disguised as a look of interest, but what she's interested in is far different than her playful smile suggests. She wants information, little tells that will let her know whether or not he is a worthwhile mark. Her smile widens, and she leans ever so slightly toward him. That was the sound of my assistant bailing the day before the biggest conference of the year and leaving me with a lot of work. Oof. Another look of sympathy from the man. I know what that's like. He's dressed like a businessman, and I have a moment of sorrow for his assistant. It happens more often than it should with her. Bullshit. It has never happened. Sounds like you need a new assistant. He holds out his hand across the aisle. I'm Jason, by the way. She gives him what I know to be a surprisingly firm handshake and her best Sharky smile. Crystal. Crystal Powers. Uck, business name? He's a mark, then. I'm rooted to the seat beside her, so have to sit through their idle conversation until the plane takeoff has them gripping their armrests and staring robotically ahead. In my experience, plane takeoffs are a little harrowing for everyone, but since this is a commuter between Los Angeles and Las Vegas, it is the equivalent of being crammed in a pack of gum strapped to a bottle rocket. The shaking is incredible, and I'm not even really here. The plane completes takeoff and starts its ascent to traveling height. I turn my head and stare out the window, attempting to drown my boss's conversation out. Soon, my eyes are focused on the plane wing we are perched over, with its little engine spinning hard. A loud sound pulled me away from the plane in my mind's eye, yanking me back to the bed with startling force. My phone. I stared blearily at the screen, then groaned when I saw the ID, boss, work cell. Jaya, sweetie, where are you? The words felt familiar as they came out of my mouth. At home, why? Well, because I'm sitting here on our flight with an empty seat next to me, honey, and I was just getting worried about you. Oh. My conscious mind replayed what I had just seen in my head. You're on the plane? Yep, all the girls are. We've got the big conference tomorrow, remember? Oh, I said again. I'd forgotten that I'd booked the flight for the entire firm. But every single one of them had walked on board. I'd really been the only one who wasn't faking, this entire time? I mean, I wasn't surprised, but at the same time I wished I had been. My boss interrupted my thoughts. You feeling okay? This isn't like you. No, actually. I feel pretty terrible. Well, look. I really need your help with this conference, hun, but we can't have you sick. Why don't you take the night to feel better and catch the commuter flight tomorrow morning? Just bill the ticket to the company card. This was dumb. Intentionally missing the flight was one thing, but not warning the girls? That was not okay. Melanie, I perfect, honey. See you tomorrow. She ended the call before I could get another word in. I sat there on my bed, phone in hand, and debated calling her back, despite knowing already that I wouldn't. If I had, I would have seen it. There was something wrong with the plane. That, or something was about to happen to it. I could still feel that sense of foreboding that had overtaken me during the first vision. And yet, right now, she was bad-mouthing me to the cute divorce attorney across the aisle from her. And somewhere in coach, 15 of my co-workers were strapped in, ready to spend the weekend teaching people everything they'd need to know to become just as successful at conning the vulnerable as they were. I threw my phone at my bedroom wall, then shrieked shit. And vaulted after it as I realized what I'd done. Great. I'd cracked the screen. After setting it a bit more gently on my dresser, I bolted for the bedroom door. I needed to find something of my boss's, and fast, so that I could see what was about to happen to my coworkers. It came to me almost immediately, Melanie's dry cleaning. She'd had me get her 3 favorite outfits cleaned, and I'd been supposed to bring them with me this morning. They were hanging in the hall closet. I skittered toward it and yanked the door open, tearing through the protective plastic covering a jacket to get my fingers on the cloth within. Focus. Just the hallway in front of me. I closed my eyes. Focus. Focus. My mind's eye goes white, and then fades into the carpeted wall of the plane. I'm back in my empty seat, looking out the window at the little engine. All I can hear is the whir and whine of the blades keeping the plane aloft. In the background, I hear Melanie's phone ping, and see her reach to check her text messages out of the corner of my eye. She makes a disgusted noise and says, "Oh, you are not going to believe this," to her Mark, but he never gets the chance to reply. Suddenly, the white of the wing outside my window blooms crimson, and the high-pitched keen of the engine cuts out, leaving my ears ringing in the sudden absence of sound. The propellers have stopped spinning because they are clogged with something red and gory. Less than a second later, the plane heaves and lurches, tilting suddenly to one side. The seatbelt sign goes on, and flight attendants begin scrambling for their seats as well. It doesn't take long for the pilot to come on the air, clearly trying to keep the worry from his voice. "We've lost an engine," he says, "and he's going to try to turn us around so we can make an emergency landing before we lose too much altitude." All around me, people begin looking at one another in fear. Some start crying, but most clutch at their seats as the plane begins to turn, lurching and rocking the entire way. But it's a two-engine plane, and this proves too much for it. The plane rolls completely in the air, then begins plummeting toward the ground as a result of the loss of speed. Some of the more enterprising passengers begin using pillows and blankets to cushion their heads as they're told to assume crash position. Beside me, Melanie is hyperventilating, but her Mark is coaxing her to follow the instructions they're being given. I see this exchange for just a moment before my eyes once again focus on the window, noting the rapidly approaching green below us. The tarmac is nowhere to be seen. Everything is shaking and rocking, and we're told to brace for impact. These words have a strange effect on the panicked passengers, as they seem to exhale and go quiet. As the plane careens toward the ground, all I can hear is the shaking of the hull and the shriek of the remaining engine. All I can feel is the quiet acceptance of roughly 200 people who know they are about to die. The wing of the lamed engine hits the ground first, and the plane flips toward it. I see the wing snap, and then the side of the plane strikes ground, and the hull explodes around me. I dropped my hand from the sleeve when I could no longer see anything. That would not be an easy crash to survive, I knew. But I also knew that there was nothing I could do, since the plane had already taken off. I stood in the hall for a moment, considering my options, before walking for my bedroom to retrieve my phone. When I found it, I stared at the hairline cracks in my phone screen and debated what I wanted the very last words I would ever say to Melanie to be. Part of me wanted to rant at her, to call her a fraud, but neither of us had that kind of time. So I distilled everything I needed her to know down into a single word and hit send, trusting in the plane's Wi-Fi to get the message to its destination. I found out from the news this morning that the plane had flown into a flock of geese during its climb to cruising altitude. Apparently this happens occasionally, and a bird that size is more than big enough to take out an engine if it gets sucked into the blades. The plane went down in sight of the tarmac. They're still trying to identify everyone, but I know in my gut that I am now a company of one. Maybe I should be more guilty than I am. Does not feeling terrible that terrible people died make me a bad person, in turn? I'm not sure. My last message to her might, though. That one word I sent to her, which I saw her read just before the plane lost its engine. Bitch. Story 11, I met a creature in the woods. This is what it told me. I suppose it's time I talked about the thing I found in the woods. You're not going to believe me, and that's okay. No one has ever believed me, not my parents, not the countless shrinks they made me visit, not the strangers I've told when I let myself have one too many beers. I don't like to talk about it because I know it sounds crazy, and part of me wonders if I made the whole thing up somehow. My parents always said I was a very imaginative child. But how could I have come up with something like this as a 9-year-old little girl? And it's not hazy, not fuzzy. Not some nightmare that resulted from me eating pepperoni pizza too close to bedtime. I know it happened. I'm not crazy. I didn't make it up. And I know it's still out there somewhere. I was always looking for adventure. The house my family lived in at the time was neither large nor old, which meant its potential for creating adventures was practically non-existent. But my parents did one thing right with that house. They purchased the surrounding land, which included a huge chunk of woods that hadn't been touched by land developers or anyone else. After all, who would want to build a Walmart in the middle of nowhere? So I would get up every weekend morning, grab an apple, and rush out to the woods to track down adventure. That mostly consisted of me playing pretend. Remember how I mentioned my overactive imagination? Well, I could turn a pile of branches into a palace or a handful of dirt into a treacherous patch of quicksand. I could amuse myself for hours, running home only to grab a snack and let my parents know I was still okay. In a lot of ways, those woods became my home. I remember vividly the first time I saw it. It was a crisp but sunny Saturday morning in September, which happened to be my favorite type of weather. I threw on a jacket and a pair of jeans, said a quick goodbye to my mother, and ran out the door. My parents let me play in the woods, but they had a rule: don't go past the 10th tree. That meant that, if I walked in a straight line from my house to the woods, I could only pass 10 trees before I had to turn around. Of course, there wasn't any way for my parents to enforce this rule, but I was a pretty good kid. I didn't want to upset them. The game I was involved in had me pretending to be a sheriff like I'd seen on my dad's movies. Each bush was an outlaw that I had to outdraw and take down for the good of my fictional town. I was so immersed that it took me a while before I noticed the doe. She was standing calmly about 10 feet away from me, just watching. Her large brown eyes surveyed me with neutral curiosity. I immediately froze. I'd seen all the Disney movies, I knew Bambi by heart. And my first instinct was to run up to the deer and pet her. The second I took a step forward, she took one back. But still, she didn't flee from me like most deer I'd seen. She just sauntered backward, maintaining the exact same distance between the two of us. I took another step, and she did the same, still facing me. Before I knew it, we'd reached the 10th tree. I halted, staring at the doe. She blinked serenely and wiggled her ears. Her eyes seemed to ask, "Are you coming?" I threw a look back over my shoulder. Through the trees I could see the window above the kitchen sink, and I could make out the forms of my parents sipping their morning coffee. They didn't have to know. Once I'd passed the 10th tree, that insurmountable borderline, the doe became more confident. She turned, flashing her white tail at me, and began determinedly marching forward. I couldn't help but follow, fascinated. A gnawing unease tried to pick at my stomach, warning me not to get too far from home, but I shoved it down. It wasn't like I expected to have this opportunity again. I didn't have a watch or a phone. This was a good 10 years before kids always had cell phones with them, so I had no reliable way of telling time, but it seemed like I followed her for at least half an hour. The whole time I was mentally crafting elaborate stories. She'd lead me to a spot where a fawn lay, injured, and she'd stand by while I scooped it up and carried it to safety, rendering me a hero. Stuff like that. Nothing could have prepared me for what really happened. Eventually I noticed a change. Her ears shot forward and she sped up, eventually breaking into a trot that made me have to start jogging. I think she would have sprinted if there'd been any chance of me keeping up with her, but even in her clearly agitated state she spared a few seconds to make sure I was following. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, and any hazy thoughts of turning back had completely evaporated by this point. We'd spent this time trekking through a swath of woods in the heart of remote Maine, which meant we weren't exactly passing cabins or even any hiking trails. This was as wild could be in mainland America. And here I was, at 9 years old, chasing an apparently self-aware deer through an area that probably hadn't been touched by humans for years. It's so ridiculous that it almost makes me want to laugh. Almost. It appeared suddenly, with no warning. 1 minute it wasn't there and the next it was. It didn't make any sense. It was a bizarre structure, completely square, with 4 plain brick walls and no roof, no windows, and no door. The second it appeared, the doe halted. I saw my chance and, after throwing another look at the brick formation that looked like it could have come out of the 11th century, I put my hand on her back. The skin on her back tensed and she shuddered slightly, but she otherwise remained still. I stared at her in bewilderment, wondering why she'd let me pet her. And then I heard it. It was a low groaning, occasionally rising in pitch and volume before sliding back down again. It sounded like someone was in pain. I was an imaginative kid. And you're about to see that I was also a really, really stupid one. I approached the building, leaving the door behind, and said, in a quavering voice, "Hello?" The sound stopped. Is someone in there?" I asked. There was a long pause. Finally, a low, gravelly, rasping voice that sounded like it was coming from the trees themselves responded. "Who are you?" "Lisa," I said. "Lisa," the voice repeated. For several minutes there was nothing but painful-sounding breathing. Then, the voice said, "Forgive me. No one has come for Ian's." "Oh," I said lamely. Then, "Are you okay?" "I am trapped," the voice murmured sadly. "Do you need help?" A soft laugh that quickly devolved into a coughing fit filtered out from the trees. I cringed. "You must be a child," the voice gasped. "Only children can be so innocent." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I remained silent. "My child," the voice continued after another lengthy pause, "you have made these woods happy. The trees smile on your harmless play, and the grass sighs with happiness even as you trample it. Do you know why?" I said nothing. "The reason," the voice said, "is that you carry no malevolence. You crush the grass, but you do not mean to. You break the branches off the trees, but you mean no harm. You commit no evil because you feel no evil." I stood, dumbfounded but transfixed. "You do not understand," the voice sighed. "I knew it would be so. But I'm old, you see. I'm very, very old. And old people cannot resist telling their stories." In spite of everything, I laughed. I could hear the voice's owner inhale deeply. "You do not know how happy it makes me to hear laughter. Too often I get nothing but sadness. Sadness, bitterness, fear, it's all the same. It's murky, dark, burnt orange and mustard green. Vile." The gnawing nervousness started to rise again. "No, child, wait." The voice became desperate, plaintive. "Please. I do not mean to frighten you. I can only tell you the truth. And the truth is that there is nothing. No hope, no love. No remorse. No joy. None of the things I thought I had gotten so right with you." I swallowed heavily and stammered, "What do you mean?" "I mean creation. Life. The earth itself." This was followed by a harsh snort. I should have stopped while I was ahead. "The dinosaurs weren't so bad." Again, I said nothing, but I thought I could make something better. Something like me. So I did away with the dinosaurs and came up with, well, you. Me? Not you, specifically. Not Lisa, my last name, who lives at my then address. I mean people, generally. Despite the cool morning, sweat started to slip out of my pores and I loved you. The voice became wistful. "Oh, I adored you. You were so smart. You took the earth, rough and unpolished as it was, and you did what I'd done with the universe. You built, you grew, you created. Just like me. Only, I wanted to turn and run. I didn't like what I was hearing. I was a stupid kid, but even I could sense that this was out of my realm. I had wandered too far, and now I didn't know how to leave. My feet felt rooted to the ground. I tried to take a step, but it was like my muscles had turned to jello and my bones to lead. "I'm afraid I can't let you go yet, not until you've heard my story," the voice said coolly. Where was I? "Oh, right. You created, but you wouldn't stop. You kept building and growing and creating, but you couldn't rein it in. You can't. And there is nothing I can do about it. I gave you free will, and I can't just take it back." For a moment, the wailing resumed. "There is nothing I can do about it. Why are you telling me this?" I whispered, fear constricting my throat. "Because I need someone to listen. I need someone to know, to tell them why. Why what? Why I have to leave." The voice took another break for several moments. "You see this box?" "Yes." That felt safe enough to answer. "It doesn't exist. Not in the sense that you think it does, anyway. But it shows how I feel, Having to sit by and watch my favorite creations destroyed themselves and the rest of my beautiful earth. I finally understood what the voice was implying, who it was claiming to be. And for a second, I got mad. Why don't you do something about it? The voice heaved a sigh that made the leaves on the trees rustle. You have it wrong, it whimpered. I can create. I have created. But that is all. I cannot do anything now that you are here. I cannot right this wrong, no matter how much I wish I could. Looking back on it now, I think the voice was manipulating me to get me to say what it wanted so it could get across all the information it wanted to. That's the only way I can explain my behavior, anyhow. I said, so what will you do now? Another pause, and then, in an anguished whine, it said, I will go. Go? I will try again. I will create somewhere else. I'll do better. And I won't make the same mistake. I thought this over. And what will happen to us? You will self-destruct. The voice delivered this in a flat monotone. You will tear each other to shreds, and you will destroy what's left of my earth while you're at it. I have been desperately trying to prevent this from happening, but, like I said, there is nothing I can do. I loved you unconditionally, and it wasn't enough. When I go, the voice continued, it will be worse. My presence has kept some of the more monstrous events at bay, but only just. Even if I were to stay forever, it would not help, just draw out your suffering. You will destroy each other. It is destiny. It is certain. The only thing left for me to do is leave so I do not have to watch it. The walls in front of me started to shimmer, and the voice murmured, my time is at its end. Promise me, my little Lisa, that you will spread the word. Let them know. I leave, but it is not for lack of trying. It is not for lack of love. I felt what seemed like warm currents of air envelop me for just a second, almost like a phantom hug. The force that had kept me in place relented as the walls disappeared entirely. And I was struck with a massive sense of loss and longing just as every single creature in the forest went silent as if on cue. For exactly 3 seconds, nothing breathed. And then every creature in the woods around me began to scream, great, resounding howls of agony and despair. It was about then that I passed out. I woke up in a hospital bed. My parents were sitting in chairs next to me. They both looked exhausted. As time passed, I learned what had happened, at least, according to them. I had left that morning. I hadn't come back by lunchtime. The police found me early the next morning, 6 miles from my house, lying in a burned patch of land. They took me to the hospital. When I woke up, I was filled with mind-numbing pain. And the look in my parents' eyes let me know they felt it, too. The first thing I said when I woke up was, something terrible happened. They exchanged glances. My father's eyebrows knit with confusion. Damn it, he muttered under his breath. She must have heard when we had the news on earlier. You're safe, honey, my mom said, leaning forward and grabbing my hand. It'll all be okay. So I had to take the time to type this out and post it here. Maybe this isn't the best place, but this is the first thing I could think of to get the word out to millions of people quickly. I have to do what they're being asked. I have to let as many people as possible know, and if I can preserve my anonymity so I don't get sent to therapy yet again, so much the better. Because eventually I figured out that my parents weren't upset because of the departure of the being that created us all. Though we all felt that pain on a subconscious level, most people didn't realize the true source. The being was right. It did get worse. Because when I woke up in my hospital bed at 9:07 a.m. on September 11th, it was just after the attacks on New York City. And if God is to be believed, that's just the beginning.